When a dying gunman rides into town to face the outlaws who destroyed him, he discovers the sheriff he came to save is guarding a secret that will shatter everything he thought he knew, including the daughter who carries his blood and doesn't know his name. Before we begin this journey through the raw, unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If you're drawn into the world of Ash Hollow, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The wind came first. It always did in Ash Hollow, carrying dust from the broken places beyond the valley where nothing decent grew anymore. The kind of wind that made shutters bang against clapboard and sent tumbleweeds skittering down the main street like witnesses fleeing a crime. It was the kind of wind that made people pull their collars tight and quicken their step, as if the air itself carried warnings. Colt Varren felt it against his face as he guided his horse down the slope overlooking the town. The gelding beneath him was ribby and tired, its coat dulled by hard miles and sparse grazing. Colt himself looked worse. His duster was stained with old blood and newer dirt, his hat brim frayed at the edges. The beard on his face was uneven, grown in patches where scar tissue refused to sprout hair anymore. His eyes, once sharp as cut glass, carried a fog that came from too many sleepless nights and too much whiskey used as medicine. He was 38 years old and looked 50. Below him, Ash Hollow spread out in the failing afternoon light, a collection of wooden buildings pressed together like people huddling against cold. The main street ran straight as a rifle barrel, lined with the usual suspects: a mercantile, a livery, a saloon with peeling paint that might have been red once, a church with a steeple that listed slightly to the left as if uncertain of its own purpose. At the far end, the jailhouse sat squat and solid, built from stone instead of wood. The only building in town that looked like it meant to last. Colt had been gone from this place for 16 years, but he could still name every building, every crooked fence post, every place where memory waited like an ambush. He nudged the horse forward. The first person to notice him was old Abel Finch, sweeping the boardwalk in front of the mercantile. Abel's broom stopped mid-stroke. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a landed fish. Then he turned and disappeared inside his store so fast he left the broom clattering to the boards. Colt watched the ripple effect. A woman hanging laundry froze with a sheet half-pinned. Two men loading a wagon stopped with their arms full of flour sacks. A child chasing a hoop stick was yanked back by his mother, who pressed him against her skirts as if Colt were a rabid dog instead of a man on a tired horse. By the time he reached the livery, the street had emptied itself. Thomas Grant stood in the livery doorway, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. He was a thick-shouldered man with a face like weathered saddle leather, and he had the distinction of being one of 3 people in Ash Hollow who'd ever called Colt a friend. "Figured you'd be dead by now," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the silent street. Colt dismounted slowly, his body protesting every movement. "Been working on it." Thomas took the reins, running an experienced hand down the gelding's legs. "This animal's about done. Join the club." "Maeve know you're coming?" Colt's jaw tightened. "She's the one who sent for me." Thomas looked up sharply. "That's so." He studied Colt's face for a long moment, reading things there that years of friendship had taught him to recognize. "She didn't mention it to me." "She wouldn't." "Timing's strange, is all I'm saying. Execution's set for tomorrow morning." Colt felt something cold settle in his gut. "Who?" "Rafe Cutter. Got caught 2 weeks back trying to rob the stage route north of here. Killed the driver and a passenger. Elias brought him in himself." The name hit Colt like a fist. Elias Brody, Maeve's husband. The man who'd married her 6 months after Colt left town with a price on his head and blood on his hands. "Elias is still wearing a badge?" Colt asked. "Acting sheriff since Marshal Thornton died last year. Been doing a decent job of it too, until this mess." Thomas led the gelding into the stable, Colt following. "Rafe Cutter's got friends, Colt. The kind that don't forget." "Wade Talbot." Thomas stopped. "You know about that?" "I know Wade. I used to ride with him before I figured out he was crazier than a shithouse rat." Colt leaned against a stall post, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. If Rafe's set to hang and Wade's still breathing, there's going to be trouble. More than trouble. There's been talk, men watching the roads, strange riders asking questions in town. Thomas unsaddled the gelding with practiced efficiency. Elias thinks he can handle it. Got himself convinced this is his chance to prove something. Prove what? That he's more than Maeve's husband, that he's a lawman who can stand tall when it counts. Thomas paused, his hands stilling on the saddle. That he's worthy of her. The words hung in the dusty air between them. Colt looked away, his gaze finding the far wall where old tack hung from iron hooks. He treats her right? Best he knows how. That's not what I asked. Thomas set the saddle across a rail, taking his time with the placement. She's safe. She's provided for. She's got a daughter who's the light of her life. That's more than a lot of women out here can say. Yeah, Colt's voice had gone flat. That's something. Where you been, Colt? Everywhere that wasn't here. That's a long list of places to not be. It's a shorter list than you'd think. Turns out most of the West looks the same when you're running from something. Colt straightened, his hand going reflexively to his ribs where the pain lived now, constant as his own heartbeat. I need a room. Boarding house is still there. Mrs. Chen runs it now. She won't ask questions if you pay in advance. I'll pay. Colt pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket, coins clinking inside, the sound of everything he had left in the world. Thomas looked at the pouch, then at Colt's face. You're hurt. Old news. How old? 3 weeks? Maybe 4. I lose track. Jesus, Colt, you see a doctor? Saw a vet in a town called Brimstone. He pulled out what he could find and told me to get my affairs in order. Colt's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Didn't have the heart to tell him I don't have any affairs. Thomas's expression darkened. How bad is it? Bad enough that I probably shouldn't have ridden 150 miles to get here, but the lady sent a message and I came. Story of my goddamn life. You need to see Doc Mercer. I need to see Maeve first. She's at the schoolhouse this time of day, teaches reading to the children 3 afternoons a week. Thomas handed Colt his saddlebags, lighter than they should be, carrying the accumulated nothing of a wasted life. Her daughter helps her sometimes. Colt felt his throat tighten. What's her name? Lila, 15 years old come September, smart as a whip and stubborn as her mother. Thomas paused. Got her mother's eyes, too, green as creek water in spring. The same eyes Colt saw every time he looked in a mirror, back when he could still stand to look at himself. Thomas, don't ask me questions I can't answer, Colt. Whatever's between you and Maeve, that's your business. But that girl deserves better than secrets and old sins catching up with her. She deserves better than me, that's for damn sure. Thomas gripped Colt's shoulder, his hand solid and real. Maybe, but you're here now, and that means something's about to break. When it does, you remember who your friends are. Colt nodded, not trusting his voice. The walk from the livery to the boarding house took 5 minutes but felt longer. Colt could feel eyes on him from behind curtains, watching his progress like he was a dangerous weather system rolling in. No one spoke to him, no one stepped out to greet him. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Mrs. Chen's boarding house sat 2 blocks off Main Street, a narrow 2-story building painted a faded yellow. The woman herself was small and severe, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. I need a room, Colt said. She looked him up and down, taking in the dust, the wear, the careful way he held himself like a man expecting pain. Week in advance, $3, no drinking in the rooms, no visitors after dark. He counted out the coins. Fair enough. She took them, testing one between her teeth before nodding. Top of the stairs, second door, bath's extra. I'll take it. 50 cents, water's hot till 6. He added 2 more quarters to her palm. She pocketed them and handed him a key attached to a wooden tag carved with the number 3. You the gunfighter everyone's whispering about? She asked. Used to be. What are you now? Colt thought about it. Tired. Something flickered in her expression, almost like sympathy. There's clean towels in the chest. Mind you don't get blood on my sheets. I'll do my best. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out on an alley where nothing much happened. Colt dropped his saddlebags on the floor and sat on the bed, testing the mattress. It was better than the ground, which was about the highest praise he could offer anything these days. He pulled off his duster and shirt, moving slowly, breathing through the pain. The bandages wrapped around his torso were yellowed with old drainage and spotted with fresh blood. He needed to change them, needed to clean the wound, needed to do a lot of things he didn't have the energy for. Instead, he lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to his own breathing and the distant sounds of the town going about its business. Somewhere, Maeve was teaching children their letters. Somewhere, Elias was preparing to hang a man and face whatever came after. Somewhere, a girl named Lila was living a life that might be about to change forever. And somewhere out in the territory, Wade Talbot was riding toward Ash Hollow with violence on his mind and blood in his plans. Colt closed his eyes. He'd give himself an hour to rest, maybe 2. Then he'd find Maeve and get answers to questions he'd carried for 16 years. He'd find out why she'd sent for him now, after all this time, with all this silence between them. He'd find out if the daughter Thomas mentioned had green eyes for a reason. But sleep came harder than it used to, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of a younger man riding away from a burning building while a woman screamed his name. In the dream, he could never quite make himself turn around. He could never quite make himself go back. When he woke, the light outside had shifted to late afternoon gold, and someone was knocking on his door. Colt sat up carefully, his hand going instinctively to where his gun belt hung over the bedpost. The knock came again, soft and uncertain. "Who is it?" "Maeve." The name hit him harder than any bullet. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit there with his hand frozen on cold metal while his heart tried to climb out of his chest. "Colt? I know you're in there. Thomas told me." He stood, pulled his shirt back on despite the pain, and opened the door. 16 years had changed her, but not in ways that made her less. Her dark hair, once worn loose past her shoulders, was now pinned up in a practical twist. Fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes and mouth, laugh lines mostly, which somehow made it worse. She wore a simple gray dress with a white collar, the kind of thing a teacher would wear, respectable and modest, and nothing like the girl he'd known who used to climb out her window at midnight to meet him by the creek. But her eyes were the same. Green and fierce and full of the kind of intelligence that had always made him feel like she could see straight through to his bones. "Hello, Colt." His throat had gone dry. "Maeve." She looked past him into the room, then back at his face. "Can I come in?" "People talk. People have been talking about me for 16 years. I'm past caring." She stepped inside without waiting for permission, and he closed the door behind her. They stood in the small room, 3 feet apart, with the whole weight of the past pressing down between them. "You look like hell," she said finally. "Been hearing that a lot lately. Are you hurt?" "Among other things." Her gaze dropped to where he held himself carefully, reading his body the way she'd always been able to. "You need a doctor. I need to know why you sent for me." "Can't it be both?" "Maeve." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I got your message 3 weeks ago in a town called Silver Creek. You wrote 4 words. Come home. It's time. I rode 150 miles with a bullet hole in my ribs because of those 4 words. So before I do anything else, before I see any doctor or wash any dust or take one more goddamn breath in this town, I need to know what the hell that means." She moved to the window, her back to him, her shoulders tight. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Wade Talbot is coming. I heard. Thomas told me about Rafe Cutter." "Then you know Elias has to hang him tomorrow. And you think Wade's going to try to stop it." "I don't think. I know." She turned to face him, and there was fear in her eyes now, raw and real. 3 days ago, a man came through town, drifter type, looking for work. He got drunk at the saloon and started running his mouth about how Rafe Cutter wasn't going to die, how his friends were coming, how this whole town was going to burn. A lot of drunk men say a lot of stupid things. This one said Wade Talbot was riding with 8 men, that they'd be here by tomorrow morning before the hanging, that anyone who stood in their way would die screaming. Her hands clenched at her sides. Elias threw him in a cell overnight to sober up. When they let him out the next morning, he was gone before breakfast. Just vanished. You think he was sent to scout things out? I think Wade wanted us to know he was coming. wanted us to be afraid. Colt moved to the window beside her, looking out at the alley where shadows were lengthening. So you called for me? Yes. Why? I'm one man, Maeve. One half-dead man with a bullet hole that won't close and a reputation that's more rust than shine these days. What the hell do you think I can do against Wade Talbot and 8 killers? She looked up at him, and for just a moment he saw the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed he could do anything. Because you're the only man I know who's ever beaten him. The memory came back sharp and clear, a canyon called Devil's Throat, 7 years ago. Wade had been running a gang that robbed stages and murdered anyone who resisted. Colt had tracked them for 3 weeks, picked off 2 of them at a waterhole, ambushed 3 more at a line shack, and finally cornered Wade and his last man in a box canyon, where the only way out was through Colt's gun. Wade's man had died. Wade had lived, but only because Colt had left him there with a bullet in his shoulder and a 3-day walk to the nearest town. He'd figured either the wound or the desert would finish what he'd started. Apparently he'd figured wrong. That was a different time, Colt said. I was a different man. Were you? She reached out, her fingers touching the front of his shirt where the bandages showed through. Or were you always this man, just better at hiding it? He caught her hand, held it. Her skin was warm against his palm, and for a moment the years fell away and they were just Colt and Maeve, 22 and 20, with the whole world ahead of them and no idea how badly they were going to break each other. I can't save this town, he said quietly. I can barely save myself. I'm not asking you to save the town. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm asking you to save Elias. That name again, driving between them like a wedge. Colt released her hand and stepped back. Your husband, yes. The man you married while I was running from a murder charge. The man I married because you left me with no choice. Fire flashed in her eyes. Don't you dare stand there and judge me, Colt Varren. You left. You ran. You never looked back. I looked back every goddamn day. But you never came back. There was a price on my head. There still is, she was shouting now, all her careful control shattering. There's still a warrant out for you in 3 territories. You're still wanted for killing Samuel Harding, but you came anyway, didn't you? Because I asked, so don't tell me you couldn't have come before. Don't tell me you had no choice. The truth of it hit him like a slap. She was right. He could have come back any time. Could have risked the rope for one more day with her, one more conversation, one chance to explain why he'd put a bullet in Samuel Harding's chest and ridden away before the blood stopped spreading. But he hadn't. He'd chosen safety over her, survival over truth, and that choice had eaten him alive one day at a time for 16 years. You're right, he said. I'm a coward. Always have been. The only brave thing I ever did was love you, and I fucked that up too. Maeve's anger drained away, leaving something sadder in its place. I didn't call you here to punish you. Then why? Because Elias is a good man, but he's not a fighter. He's brave and he's honest and he tries so hard to be strong, but he's never killed anyone. Never even drawn his gun on a man who was trying to kill him back. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. Wade Talbot is going to come, and Elias is going to stand in front of that jail and try to protect Rafe Cutter because that's what the law says he has to do. And Wade is going to kill him, and I can't lose him. Not like that. Not when I can stop it. By calling me. By calling the only man I know who's killed enough people to maybe kill a few more. It should have stung, but it didn't. It was just the truth, plain and simple. Colt had killed 23 men in his life. He could name every one of them, remember their faces, recall the exact moment when the light left their eyes. It was the kind of accounting a man kept when he couldn't afford to forget. Where's Elias now? He asked. At the jail? He's been sleeping there since they brought Rafe in, afraid someone might try to break him out. Smart. He asked the town council to deputize 10 men. They gave him 3, and 2 of them are barely 20 years old. Her voice was bitter. Everyone talks about justice and law and doing what's right, but when it comes time to actually stand up, suddenly everyone has pressing business elsewhere. That's towns for you. Big on words, short on spine. Will you help him? Colt looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear and the pride and the desperation all mixed together, saw the woman she'd become and the girl she'd been, and the choices that had led her from one to the other. I'll talk to him, he said. But I'm not making any promises beyond that. If he's set on being a hero, there's not much I can do to stop him. He'll listen to you. Why would he? I'm the man who loved his wife first. He's not stupid, Colt. He knows our history, but he also knows you're the best chance he's got. She moved toward the door, then paused. There's something else you need to know. His heart lurched. What? Lila, my daughter. She turned to face him fully. She's been asking about you. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too everything. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. She saw you ride in today, asked Thomas who you were. He told her you were an old friend of mine from before I married Elias. That's true enough. She wants to meet you. Maeve, I know. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know what I'm asking, but she's smart, Colt. She sees things. And she looks at Elias, and then she looks in the mirror, and she knows something doesn't quite add up. Does Elias know? The question hung in the air between them, heavy as a loaded gun. He suspects, Maeve said finally. We've never talked about it directly, but he's not blind. He knows the timing, knows I was 3 months along when we married. He loves her anyway, raised her like his own, never treated her as anything less than his daughter. He's a better man than me. He's a different man than you. Not better, just different. She opened the door. The jail's 2 blocks north. You can't miss it. Maeve. She stopped, waiting. Does she know? In her heart, does she know? I think she's always known. She just doesn't know what to call it yet. Then she was gone, leaving Colt alone with the truth he'd been running from for 15 years and 9 months. The truth that somewhere in this town was a girl with green eyes and his blood in her veins. A girl who deserved better than a father who'd left before she was born and stayed gone through every birthday, every scraped knee, every moment when a girl might need someone to tell her she was brave and strong and worthy of love. He sat back down on the bed, his ribs screaming protest, and tried to remember how to breathe. The sun was low when Colt finally left the boarding house and walked toward the jail. The street had emptied even more as darkness approached, as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for whatever storm was coming. The jail was exactly where he remembered it, solid and square, built by men who understood that some things needed to last. Lamplight showed in the windows. Outside, a man sat on the steps cleaning a rifle. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a badge pinned to his vest that still looked new. He looked up as Colt approached, his hand stilling on the rifle. Help you? Looking for Elias Brody. Sheriff's inside. What's your business? His wife sent me. The young man's eyes narrowed. You're Varren. That a problem? Depends on why you're here. Maybe I'm here to turn myself in. Still got that warrant hanging over me. The deputy stood, bringing the rifle with him. Maybe you should keep walking. Easy. Colt held his hands away from his sides, showing empty palms. I'm not here to cause trouble. Maeve asked me to talk to Elias, that's all. Why would she do that? Why don't you ask her? They stared at each other for a long moment, the young man trying to decide if he was brave enough to actually point that rifle at someone who'd point back. The door opened, saving them both from finding out. Elias Brody stepped into the fading light, and Colt got his first look at the man who'd married Maeve and raised his daughter and worn a badge in a town that didn't deserve him. He was tall, maybe 6 foot even, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so lined with worry. He wore his badge on a leather vest over a white shirt and a gun belt that sat on his hips like something he was still getting used to. His eyes were brown, kind, and currently filling with recognition and something that might have been resignation. It's all right, David, Elias said to the deputy. I'll talk to him. David looked uncertain. You sure, Sheriff? Go get some dinner. Be back in an hour. The young man glanced between them, then nodded and walked off, taking his rifle and his suspicion with him. Elias watched him go, then turned to Colt. You always did know how to make an entrance. Didn't think I was that memorable. You left a considerable impression the last time you were here. Bodies have a way of doing that. Elias gestured to the jail. Come inside. We should talk where the whole town isn't watching. Colt followed him in. The jail was simple. A front office with a desk, a gun rack, and a wood stove. A back room with 2 cells separated by iron bars. In the far cell, a man lay on a narrow cot staring at the ceiling. Rafe Cutter was maybe 30, lean and hard, with the kind of eyes that had stopped seeing other people as real a long time ago. He didn't look at Colt when they entered, just kept staring upward like he could see straight through the ceiling to whatever came next. Elias closed the door to the cell area, giving them privacy in the front office. He moved to the stove, poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered pot, and handed one to Colt. "You look like you've been through a war," Elias said. "Something like that." "Maeve said you were coming. I wasn't sure I believed her." Colt sipped the coffee. It was terrible, burnt and bitter, but it was hot, and that counted for something. "She thinks you're going to die tomorrow." "She might be right. She sent for me to stop it." "And will you?" The question was direct, honest, without any of the dancing around that might have made it easier to answer. Colt set down his cup. "Depends. You planning on hanging Rafe Cutter?" "That's the law." "Law's just words on paper. Won't mean much when Wade Talbot comes riding in with 8 killers at his back." "It means something to me." "Enough to die for?" Elias was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to the closed door that separated them from the condemned man. Rafe Cutter shot a stage driver in the chest while he was begging for his life. Then he put 2 bullets in a passenger who was already wounded and bleeding. The passenger was a woman. She had a daughter waiting for her in Denver. "And that means you have to die too?" "It means someone has to stand for the idea that actions have consequences, that you can't just kill people and ride away." Elias looked at him. "I'm not naive, Colt. I know Wade's coming. I know the odds. But if I run now, if I let fear make my decisions, then I'm not fit to wear this badge or stand in front of people and tell them the law matters." "Pretty speech. Won't sound as good with a bullet in your head." "Maybe not. But at least I'll die knowing I stood for something." Colt felt an unwelcome respect stirring. He'd wanted to hate this man, had spent 16 years building a version of Elias Brody in his head that was weak and small and unworthy. But the man standing in front of him was none of those things. He was just a man trying to do right in a world that made it damn near impossible. "How many deputies you got?" 3. David, who you met. Jacob Moss, who's 63 and has arthritis in his hands. And Tommy Chen, who's Mrs. Chen's nephew, and has never fired a gun at anything that wasn't a bottle on a fence post. Christ. I asked for more. The council said 3 was all they could spare. Meaning they don't want to risk anyone they actually give a damn about. Elias's smile was grim. "You've been gone a long time, but you remember how it works." Colt moved to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "You know who Wade Talbot is?" "I know the stories." "Stories don't cover half of it. Wade's not just mean, he's calculated. He'll send men in first to test you, see how you respond. Then he'll come himself, and by that time he'll know exactly where you're weak. You fought him before?" "Once, 7 years ago. I got lucky." "Lucky how?" "I caught him in a place where he couldn't run and couldn't hide. Made him fight on my terms instead of his." Colt turned from the window. "But that was then. I was younger, faster, not carrying a bullet hole that's been leaking for 3 weeks. I'm not the man I was." "But you'll fight anyway." It wasn't a question. Colt thought about Maeve's face, about the fear in her eyes. Thought about a girl named Lila who had green eyes and his blood. And no idea her whole world was about to crack apart. Thought about all the running he'd done and all the places he'd been, and how none of it had ever put any real distance between him and the things he'd left behind. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'll fight. Not for you, not for this town, but for Maeve, and for reasons that are between me and her. I'll stand with you tomorrow." Elias nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We might both be dead by noon." "Still, you didn't have to come." "Yeah, I did. I just spent 16 years figuring that out." They stood in the lamplight, 2 men who loved the same woman, about to face death for different reasons that somehow added up to the same answer. "I know about Lila," Elias said quietly. Colt's breath caught. "I've always known. The timing, the eyes, the way Maeve looks at you in the one photograph we have from before you left." Elias set down his coffee cup. "I've raised her, fed her, taught her to ride, sat up with her through fevers, walked her through nightmares. She's my daughter in every way that matters. I know that. But she's going to figure it out soon if she hasn't already. She's too smart not to, and when she does, she'll have questions Questions I can't answer. Elias met his eyes. If we survive tomorrow, if we somehow make it through whatever's coming, you're going to have to decide what you want to be to her. A name from her mother's past, or something more. I don't have the right to be anything more. Maybe not, but she deserves the choice of knowing the truth. Before Colt could respond, the door banged open. David stood there, his face pale. Sheriff, you need to see this. They followed him outside. The street was no longer empty. A crowd had gathered, maybe 40 people, standing in the fading light with the kind of nervous energy that came before a lynching or a riot. At the front stood 3 men in suits, the town council, Colt guessed. Behind them, the faces of Ash Hollow, shopkeepers and farmers, wives and children, all watching the jail with a mixture of fear and something uglier. The man in the center of the 3 stepped forward. He was heavy-set, with mutton chops and a gold watch chain stretched across his vest. His voice carried across the street. Sheriff Brody, we need to talk. Elias walked to meet him, Colt a half-step behind. What's this about, Councilman Marsh? It's about tomorrow. About the hanging. Marsh glanced at the crowd behind him, drawing strength from numbers. We've been talking. Folks are concerned. Concerned about what? Justice being served? Concerned about their families, their homes, their lives. Marsh's voice rose, playing to the crowd. You know Wade Talbot's coming. Everyone knows it. And when he gets here, people are going to die. Good people. Innocent people. So what are you suggesting? We think maybe the hanging should be postponed. Maybe Rafe Cutter should be transferred to the territorial prison. Let them deal with him. There's no time for that. The transport doesn't come through for another week. Then maybe we let him go. The words fell into the street like stones into still water, rippling outward. Elias's voice went cold. Let him go. Just until things settle down. Until Wade moves on. Marsh was sweating now, despite the cool evening. It's not worth dying over, Elias. One outlaw isn't worth the whole town. And what happens the next time someone commits murder? Do we let them go too, if their friends look mean enough? Where does it end? It ends with us surviving, a woman's voice from the crowd, high and frightened. It ends with our children waking up tomorrow. Others joined in, voices overlapping. She's right. Let him go. It's not worth it. Think of your family. Elias stood silent, watching them. Watching people he'd protected, people he'd helped, people he'd considered neighbors and friends, all ready to throw away everything they claimed to believe in because fear had shown up with a gun. Colt saw it in his face, the moment when something broke. The moment when Elias realized he was standing alone. No, Elias said. The crowd went quiet. No, he repeated, louder now. Rafe Cutter killed 2 people in cold blood. He's been tried, convicted, and sentenced. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, that sentence will be carried out. If Wade Talbot has a problem with that, he can take it up with me. You'll get us all killed, someone shouted. Then leave, Elias shot back. Pack up and run. Hide in your houses and pray Wade doesn't notice you. But I'm not letting a murderer walk because you're afraid. Marsh's face darkened. You're relieved of duty, Sheriff. You don't have the authority. The council voted this afternoon. Unanimous. You're done. Elias's hand dropped to his badge, and for a moment Colt thought he might actually rip it off and throw it in Marsh's face. But instead, he left it pinned to his vest. The law doesn't work that way, Councilman. I was appointed by the territorial marshal. Only he can remove me. Until then, I'm the sheriff, and Rafe Cutter hangs tomorrow. He turned and walked back into the jail, leaving the crowd muttering behind him. Colt followed, closing the door on the angry voices. Inside, Elias stood with his hands braced on his desk, his head down. His shoulders were shaking. You all right? Colt asked. They were going to let him go. Elias's voice was hollow. All their talk about civilization and law and order, and at the first sign of real trouble, they were ready to open the cell and wave goodbye. People are afraid. Being afraid doesn't make you a coward. Letting fear choose for you does. He looked up. I can't do this alone. You're not alone. You've got 3 deputies. David will stay. The other 2 will vanish by morning, guaranteed. Elias met his eyes. I need you. You've got me. Not as a gunman, as a deputy. He pulled open a drawer, took out a silver star, and held it out. I'm deputizing you, official and legal. Colt looked at the badge like it was a snake. That's a mistake. Why? Because I'm wanted in 3 territories. Because I've killed 23 men. Because that badge will burn a hole in my chest the second you pin it there. Or maybe it'll remind you that you're more than what you've done. That you can choose to be something different. Elias's hand didn't waver. I need someone who knows how to fight. Who knows Wade. Who might actually be mean enough to give us a chance. That's you. Colt stared at the badge, at the light catching on its surface, at the weight of what it represented. Law and order, protection, and service. Everything he'd run from his whole life. He took it. The metal was cool in his palm, solid and real. He turned it over, seeing his own distorted reflection in its shine. I'll wear it tomorrow, he said, for the fight. But after, if there is an after, this goes back in your desk. Fair enough? Colt slipped the badge into his pocket. We need a plan. I'm open to suggestions. First thing, we need to know when Wade's coming and how many men he's actually got. That drunk who was running his mouth, you believe him? I believe Wade sent him to scare us. Whether the numbers are real, I don't know. We need a scout, someone who can ride out, check the approaches, give us warning. David can do it. No, David stays here with you. Someone sees a deputy riding out, they'll know we're spooked. Colt thought for a moment. Thomas Grant. He knows the territory, knows how to stay quiet, and people are used to seeing him come and go from the livery. Thomas isn't a fighter. Don't need him to fight, just need him to look and report back. Elias nodded. I'll ask him. Second, we need to fort up. This jail's solid, but it's got too many windows. We need to reinforce them, set up firing positions, make it so Wade can't just ride up and shoot through glass. What about the gallows? The question brought them both up short. The hanging was supposed to happen in the street, public and official. But public meant exposed, meant targets. We move it inside, Colt said. Into the jail. Hang him in the cell block if we have to. Won't be pretty, but it'll be safer. The law says it has to be public. The law says a lot of things. Right now, we're just trying to keep people breathing long enough to argue about it later. From the cell block, Rafe Cutter's voice drifted through. You boys are going to die tomorrow. They both looked at the closed door. He say anything else? Colt asked. Not much. Just lies there smiling like he knows something we don't. Maybe he does. Elias moved to the door, opened it. Rafe was sitting up now, watching them with eyes that held no fear, no concern, nothing but a cold certainty. Wade's going to kill you slow, Rafe said. Going to make you watch while he burns this whole town. Then he's going to take his time with that pretty wife of yours, Sheriff. Going to make her scream. Elias's hand went to his gun. Colt caught his wrist. He's trying to bait you. Don't give him the satisfaction. I'm just stating facts, Rafe continued, his smile widening. Wade don't forget his friends, and he don't forgive his enemies. You should have let me go when you had the chance. Shut your mouth, Elias said, his voice shaking. Or what? You going to shoot me? Save Wade the trouble? Rafe laughed. Nah, you're a lawman. You'll do everything proper and legal right up until the moment Wade puts a bullet in your brain. Colt pulled Elias back, shut the door. Don't listen to him, Colt said. He's right, though. Wade's going to come, and we're probably going to die. Probably, but not definitely, and that's enough to work with. Elias looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. Why are you really here, Colt? You know why. Maeve sent for me. That's not what I'm asking. You could have ignored her letter. Could have kept writing. Could have left me to face this alone. But you came anyway. Why? Colt thought about Maeve's green eyes and the daughter who shared them. Thought about 16 years of running and all the things he'd left unfinished. Thought about Samuel Harding's body lying in the dirt and the moment when Colt had chosen blood over everything else he'd ever wanted. Because I owe her, he said finally. Because I owe you both. And because somewhere in this town is a girl who deserves better than a dead sheriff and a coward for a father. Understanding flickered across Elias's face. You're going to tell her. If I live long enough, yeah, she deserves the truth. She deserves a lot of things. Not sure we can give them to her. No, but we can try not to die tomorrow. That's a start. The door opened again. David was back, and he wasn't alone. Thomas Grant stood beside him, looking grim. "Figured you'd need me," Thomas said to Colt. "David filled me in on the plan." "You don't have to do this," Elias said. "Sure I do. Been a friend of this town for 30 years. Not going to stop now just because things got scary." Thomas looked at Colt. "When you want me to ride?" "First light, check the north and west roads. That's where Wade'll likely come from. Don't engage, just count heads and get back here fast." "I can do that." "Good man." Colt turned to Elias. "We should get started on those windows. It's going to be a long night." And it was. They worked through the darkness, Colt and Elias and David, boarding up windows with planks Thomas brought from the livery. They moved furniture, created firing positions, checked ammunition. Doc Mercer came by around midnight with bandages and medical supplies, took one look at Colt's ribs, and insisted on changing the dressing. "This is infected," the doctor said, his fingers gentle but firm as he cleaned the wound. "Should have seen me 3 weeks ago. Wasn't in the neighborhood. You're going to die if this doesn't get proper treatment. Put it on my list of concerns." Mercer finished wrapping fresh bandages, his expression troubled. "Maeve knows you're hurt. She knows. And she still asked you to do this? She asked me to help. I'm the one who decided to die for it." The doctor packed up his bag. "For what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong. Join the club." By 2 in the morning, they'd done everything they could. The jail was as ready as it was going to be. David was sent to get a few hours' sleep. Thomas had already left, promising to be back by dawn with whatever news he found. Colt and Elias sat in the office, drinking bad coffee and listening to Rafe Cutter snore in his cell. "You ever been married?" Elias asked suddenly. "No." "Ever come close?" Colt thought about a girl with dark hair and green eyes, about a creek bed under starlight, about promises that had shattered the moment Samuel Harding drew his gun. "Once." "What happened?" "I killed a man and ran away. She married someone better." Elias was quiet for a long time. "You ever regret it?" "Every day of my life." "Would you do it differently, if you could go back?" Colt looked at him, at this man who'd built a life out of the pieces Colt had left behind. "I don't know. Samuel Harding was a bastard who deserved what he got, but maybe I could have found another way. Maybe I could have been smarter or faster or just different." Maeve never told me exactly what happened that night. It's not a story that makes anyone look good. I'd still like to hear it. If we're going to die together tomorrow, seems like I should know. So Colt told him about Samuel Harding, the richest man in Ash Hollow, who decided Maeve was going to be his wife whether she wanted it or not. Told him about the threats and the pressure and the night Harding cornered her behind the church and put his hands on her in ways that left bruises. Told him about Colt finding her crying, about Harding's smile when Colt confronted him, about the way Harding had drawn his gun first, but Colt had been faster. Told him about the witnesses who lied, who said Colt had murdered an unarmed man in cold blood, about the judge who was Harding's cousin, about the warrant and the bounty and the choice between a noose and the horizon. "I told Maeve I'd come back," Colt said. "Told her I'd clear my name and we'd be together. She believed me. Waited 6 months before she realized I was never coming." "But you did come back, just 16 years late." "Yeah." "Was she already pregnant when you left?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. "I don't know," Colt said honestly. "We'd been together, but I didn't know about Lila until I was 300 miles gone and there was no going back." "Did you try?" "To come back?" "Every goddamn day for the first year. But the longer I stayed away, the easier it got to convince myself she was better off without me, that you'd give her and the baby a better life than I ever could." "I tried to," Elias said quietly. "I've tried to be a good husband, a good father, to make her happy." "Did it work?" "I think so, most days." He stared into his coffee. "But there's a part of her I can't reach, a place where she keeps something locked away, and I've always known that place has your name on it. I'm sorry." "Don't be. She chose to marry me, chose to build a life here. Those were her decisions." Elias looked up. "But Lila, she's going to want answers, and you're going to have to decide if you're ready to give them." "What if I'm not?" "Then you're still a coward, just a better dressed one." Colt laughed despite himself.
You're all right, Brody. For a man who stole my girl, anyway. I didn't steal her. You threw her away. I just picked up the pieces. The truth of it landed like a blow.
Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. Dawn was coming, and with it, whatever Wade Talbot had planned. Colt stood, his ribs protesting. You should get some sleep, couple hours at least. What about you? I'll keep watch. I don't sleep much these days anyway. Elias studied him. The wound's worse than you're letting on, isn't it? Everything's worse than I let on. That's kind of my specialty. If you die tomorrow, see, when I die tomorrow. Will you do something for me? Depends what it is. Die making sure Maeve and Lila live, that's all I ask. Everything else, the badge, the jail, the law, this whole goddamn town, none of it matters as much as them. Colt felt something twist in his chest. You really love them. More than my own life. Then we're on the same page. Elias nodded and headed for the back room where a cot waited. Colt moved to the window, looking out at the empty street as the darkness slowly retreated. Somewhere out there, Wade Talbot was riding toward Ash Hollow with murder on his mind. Somewhere in town, Maeve was probably lying awake, worrying. And somewhere, a girl named Lila was sleeping, unaware that tomorrow would change everything she thought she knew about her life. Colt touched the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight. For 16 years, he'd run from responsibility, from consequence, from anything that might pin him down or make him matter. But standing here in the growing light, watching over a town that didn't want him and a law he'd never respected, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It probably wouldn't be enough to save him, probably wouldn't even be enough to save Ash Hollow. But it was something. And after 16 years of nothing, something felt like everything. The sun broke over the eastern hills, painting the street in shades of gold and amber. It was going to be a beautiful day to die. Thomas Grant returned just after sunrise, his horse lathered and blowing hard. Colt met him at the jail steps, reading the news in the old man's face before a single word was spoken. How many? Colt asked. 9, maybe 10. Hard to get an exact count with the trees. Thomas dismounted, his legs stiff from the hard ride. They're camped about 5 miles north, up in Miller's Canyon. Got a good view of both roads into town. Wade with them? Couldn't get close enough to see faces, but there's one man who's giving orders. The others move when he talks. Thomas pulled a canteen from his saddle, drank deep. They're not in any hurry, sitting around their fire like they're on a Sunday picnic. Elias emerged from the jail, his face drawn from too little sleep. When do you think that they'll come? Noon, maybe later. Thomas wiped his mouth. They want you sweating, want the whole town watching and waiting. Wade's always been one for making a show of things. How are they armed? Colt asked. Rifles mostly. Saw a couple shotguns. Everyone's carrying sidearms. Thomas hesitated. There's something else. They've got dynamite, 2 crates worth looked like. Elias went pale. He's planning to blow the jail. Or use it as a threat. Colt's mind was already working through scenarios, discarding the ones that ended with them all dead, looking for the narrow path that might lead somewhere else. Dynamite's loud and messy. Wade'll use it if he has to, but he'd rather not. Brings too much attention from the territorial marshal. So what's his play? Elias asked. He'll offer you a deal first. Let Rafe go. Everyone walks away alive. When you refuse, he'll make an example. Kill a few townspeople, maybe burn a building or 2. Then he'll come for the jail with everything he's got. We can't let him hurt civilians. We can't stop him. Colt looked at Thomas. How were people this morning? Anyone packing up to leave? Half the town's already gone. Saw 3 wagons heading south before I rode out. Others are boarding up, hiding in cellars, pretending they don't hear what's coming. Cowards, Elias spat. Smart people, Colt corrected. They've got families to protect. Can't blame them for not wanting to die over principle. Then what are we dying for? The question hung in the morning air, sharp as a blade. Before Colt could answer, a woman's voice cut across the street. Elias! Maeve was running toward them, her skirts lifted to keep from tripping, her face flushed with exertion and fear. Behind her, struggling to keep up, came a girl with dark hair pulled back in a braid and eyes the color of spring grass. Lila. Colt's breath stopped in his chest. She was tall for 15, willowy and graceful in the way young things were before the world taught them to be careful. She had Maeve's face, her mother's strong jaw and high cheekbones. But the eyes were his. The stubborn set of her mouth was his. The way she moved, with a kind of restless energy that couldn't quite be contained, that was his too. She was his daughter, and looking at her felt like being shot all over again. Maeve reached them, breathing hard.
Thomas, I saw you ride in. What did you find?
Nothing good, Thomas said gently.
They're coming, Maeve. Today. Her face crumpled for just a moment before she forced it back into something resembling calm. How long do we have?
Few hours, maybe more.
Lila had caught up now, standing beside her mother and looking at the men gathered on the jail steps with sharp, assessing eyes. When her gaze landed on Colt, it stuck there. You're him, she said.
The gunfighter. Lila, Maeve said sharply. That's enough.
What?
Everyone's talking about him. They say he's killed more men than cholera.
The girl's eyes narrowed, studying Colt with an intensity that made him want to look away. You don't look that scary.
Lila!
Maeve's voice cracked like a whip, but Colt found himself almost smiling.
Smart kid.
I'm not scary, just tired and mean, and there's a difference.
Are you going to help my father?
The word father landed like a stone between them. Elias shifted uncomfortably. Maeve's hand went to her daughter's shoulder, gripping tight. That's the plan, Colt said carefully.
Good. Because he's not a gunfighter. He's a good man, and good men shouldn't have to fight killers alone.
She said it with such fierce certainty that Colt felt something crack inside his chest.
You're right, he said. They shouldn't. Maeve pulled Lila away before she could say anything else. We need to go, now. But Mama… Now, Lila. The girl went, but not without one last look over her shoulder at Colt. A look that said she knew something wasn't adding up, that pieces were missing from a puzzle she couldn't quite name yet. When they were out of earshot, Thomas let out a low whistle. That girl's got your number, Colt. She's got everyone's number. Too damn smart for her own good.
Wonder where she gets that from, Elias said quietly.
The three men stood in silence for a moment, watching Maeve and Lila disappear around the corner toward the schoolhouse. She can't be here when Wade comes, Elias said finally. Neither of them can. Where would you send them? Colt asked. Town's already evacuating. Roads aren't safe. The church. It's got a root cellar, stone walls, only one entrance. Doc Mercer's setting it up as a refuge for women and children.
Elias's voice was tight. I need to know they'll be safe.
Nothing's safe today. Best we can do is give them a chance. David appeared from inside the jail, carrying a rifle and looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Sheriff, it's almost 8. If we're going to move the prisoner… We're not moving him, Elias said. Hanging happens at 9, inside the jail, just like we planned.
But, sir, the law says a lot of things that don't account for 9 armed men with dynamite. We hang him here behind walls where we can control who sees and who doesn't. David swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Where's Tommy and Jacob? The young deputy wouldn't meet his eyes. Tommy's mother locked him in their cellar, says she won't let him out to get killed.
And Jacob? Jacob left a note. Said he's got grandchildren in Laramie. Said he's sorry.
Elias closed his eyes.
So it's just you? Yes, sir. Just me.
David's voice shook slightly.
But I'm here. I'm staying.
You don't have to. You've got your whole life ahead of you. So do you, Sheriff, but you're staying. The kid straightened his shoulders, trying to look braver than he felt. If you can stand for something, so can I. Colt saw Elias's throat work as he swallowed hard. All right then, let's get this done. They moved inside and Colt got his first good look at Rafe Cutter in full daylight.
The condemned man was sitting on his cot, hands folded in his lap, completely calm. When they opened his cell, he stood without being asked and held out his wrists for the manacles. You boys are making a mistake, Rafe said conversationally. Wade don't leave loose ends. You hang me, every single person in this town pays for it. Then they'll pay, Elias said, snapping the irons closed. But you'll still be dead. Will I? Rafe smiled. Day's young yet, Sheriff. Lot can happen between now and 9 o'clock. They led him out to the main office where they'd rigged a beam across 2 support posts. It wasn't pretty, wasn't dignified, wasn't anything like what the law prescribed, but it would do the job. Thomas had brought the rope. Colt checked the knot, making sure it was tied right. He'd seen too many hangings go wrong, had watched men strangle slowly because someone didn't know how to calculate drop distance and body weight. If they were doing this, they were doing it clean. "You want a preacher?" Elias asked Rafe. "What for?" "I know where I'm going, and ain't no words gonna change it." "Any last statement?" "Yeah. You're all dead men." Rafe looked at each of them in turn, his smile never wavering. "But I'll save you seats in hell." Elias pulled the hood over Rafe's head, and Colt positioned the noose. His hands were steady despite everything, despite the pain in his ribs, despite the exhaustion, despite the girl with green eyes waiting somewhere in town for the truth he'd never had the courage to tell. The clock on the wall read 8:47. "Any reason we should wait?" Elias asked. "None I can think of," Colt said. "Then let's—" The door crashed open. Councilman Marsh stood there with 6 men behind him, all carrying weapons. The lead man was young and hard-eyed, with the deputy's badge pinned crooked on his vest. "Sheriff Brody," Marsh said, breathing hard. "Step away from the prisoner." Elias's hand dropped to his gun. "What the hell is this?" "This is the council exercising its authority. We're taking custody of Rafe Cutter." "Like hell you are." "We voted. Unanimous. The hanging is postponed indefinitely, and Cutter is to be released into Wade Talbot's custody when he arrives." "You can't do that," David said, his voice cracking. "We just did." Marsh gestured to the hard-eyed man. "This is Frank Holloway. As of this morning, he's the new acting sheriff of Ash Hollow. You're relieved, Elias." Colt saw the moment when Elias made his choice, saw his hand tighten on his gun, saw his jaw set, saw everything he believed in, and stood for come down to this single moment in a jailhouse that smelled like old coffee and fear. "No," Elias said. "This isn't a request." "I said no." Elias drew his gun, not pointing it at anyone, but making it clear he would if he had to. "I'm the legal sheriff of this territory, appointed by Marshal Thornton. You want to remove me, you get the marshal's signature. Until then, this is my jail, that's my prisoner, and anyone who tries to take him answers to me." Frank Holloway's hand moved toward his weapon. Colt's gun was out and cocked before Frank's fingers touched leather. "I wouldn't." The room went still. "You're Colt Varren," Frank said, his eyes widening slightly. "You're wanted for murder in 3 territories, yeah. And you know what? I don't have a damn thing to lose by adding to that count." Colt's voice was flat, empty of everything except the truth. "So here's how this works. You and your bought badges turn around and walk out that door. Sheriff Brody hangs his prisoner, and maybe, if we're all real lucky, we get through today without adding bodies to the count. The council can go to hell," Thomas cut in. He'd picked up a rifle from the rack, was holding it with the kind of casual competence that said he knew which end the bullets came out of. "This is still the law's house, Marsh, and the law says convicted murderers hang." Marsh looked at the guns, at the faces of men who'd decided what hill they were dying on. His bluster deflated like a punctured bladder. "You're making a mistake," he said, but he was already backing toward the door. "Won't be my first," Elias replied. "Probably won't be my last either." They left, Frank Holloway going last, his hand still hovering near his gun like he was thinking about making a play. Colt kept his pistol trained on the man's chest until the door closed behind them. "That's going to come back on us," David said. "Everything comes back eventually," Colt said, holstering his weapon. "Might as well make it count." Elias looked at the clock. 8:53. "Let's finish this." They positioned Rafe on the mark Colt had chalked on the floor. The condemned man's breathing had quickened behind the hood, the first real sign of fear he'd shown. "Wade's coming," Rafe said, his voice muffled. "He's coming right now, and you're all going to burn." "Maybe," Elias said, "but you won't be around to see it." He pulled the lever. The trapdoor they'd rigged dropped open, and Rafe Cutter fell through with a snap that echoed in the small room. His body jerked once, twice, then went still. Colt checked for a pulse, found nothing. "It's done." Elias stood staring at the body, his face carved from stone. He'd just killed a man, legally, officially, in the name of the law, and Colt could see it settling into him, becoming part of who he was. You never forgot your first. Never stopped seeing it when you closed your eyes. Cut him down, Elias said quietly. We'll bury him after. If there is an after, Thomas muttered. They were lowering the body when they heard it. The sound of horses, a lot of them, coming down the main street at a steady walk that somehow sounded worse than a gallop. Colt moved to the window, careful to stay behind the boards they'd nailed up. Through the gaps, he could see them. 9 riders spread across the street in a loose line. They weren't hurrying, weren't hiding, just riding into town like they owned it, like they owned everything, and the world better step aside or get trampled. Wade Talbot rode in the center. He looked older than Colt remembered, harder somehow, like the years had filed him down to nothing but edge. His face was all angles and scars, his eyes the color of dirty ice. He wore 2 guns, cavalry style, and sat his horse like a man who'd been born in the saddle and planned to die there. The riders stopped in front of the jail, their horses stamping and blowing. Wade looked at the boarded windows, at the reinforced door, at the jail that had turned itself into a fort. Then he smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Colt had ever seen. Elias Brody, Wade's voice carried across the empty street. We need to talk. Elias moved to the door, but Colt caught his arm. Don't. I have to. You step out there, you're dead. Maybe. But if I don't, he'll start killing people to prove a point. Elias pulled free. This is what I signed up for. He opened the door and stepped into the sunlight. Wade's smile widened. There he is, the famous Sheriff Brody. Heard a lot about you. Can't say the same. Elias stood on the jail steps, his hand near his gun but not touching it. What do you want, Talbot? Want? Hell, Sheriff, I want a lot of things. Cold beer, warm woman, enough money that I never have to work another day in my life. Wade leaned forward in his saddle. But today, I'll settle for my friend Rafe walking out of that jail. Can't help you with that. Rafe Cutter was hanged 10 minutes ago for murder. The smile fell off Wade's face like someone had cut it away with a knife. Say that again. He's dead. Legal execution, witnessed and recorded. If you want to file a complaint, take it up with the territorial marshal. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Wade started laughing, a sound like breaking glass. You hanged him. You actually hanged him. He looked at his men, shaking his head in apparent disbelief. This stupid son of a bitch actually did it. It's what the law required. The law. Wade spat the word like it tasted bad. You know what I think of your law, Sheriff? I think it's worth about as much as yesterday's shit. And you know what happens to people who hide behind it? Why don't you tell me? Wade's hand moved in a blur, his gun clearing leather so fast Colt barely saw it. The shot cracked across the street, and Elias stumbled backward, his hand going to his shoulder where blood was already spreading across his shirt. They bleed, Wade said calmly, holstering his weapon. They bleed and they cry and they die knowing the law didn't save them. Colt was already moving, dragging Elias back inside the jail as 3 more shots punched through the door above their heads. David slammed it shut, threw the bar across. How bad? Colt asked, ripping open Elias's shirt. Through and through, shoulder. Elias's face was pale, but his eyes were focused. Could be worse. Could be better too. Colt wadded cloth against the wound, applying pressure. Thomas, get Doc Mercer. Tell him, I'm not leaving, Thomas said. Neither am I, David added. Outside, Wade's voice rose again. That was a warning, Sheriff. Next bullet goes in someone who matters. You've got 5 minutes to think it over. Colt looked at the 3 men who'd chosen to stand with a dying lawman in a failing town. 1 scared kid, 1 old stable hand, and 1 sheriff who'd just taken a bullet for doing the right thing. We're not going to win this, Colt said quietly. You all know that, right? Probably not, Thomas agreed. Definitely not, David said. But we're going to make them pay for every inch, Elias added, his voice tight with pain. We're going to make it cost. Colt looked out through the window gaps at Wade Talbot and his killers, at the empty street behind them where the good people of Ash Hollow were hiding in their cellars and praying someone else would solve their problems. He thought about Maeve and Lila, hopefully safe in the church cellar. Thought about the badge in his pocket that he still hadn't pinned on. Thought about 16 years of running and all the places it had brought him, which turned out to be right back to the beginning after all. All right then, he said. Let's give them hell. Wade's voice came again. 5 minutes, Sheriff. Then I start burning buildings. Colt checked his guns, counted his ammunition. 43 rounds, give or take, not nearly enough. We need a plan, David said. We've got a plan, Colt replied. We hole up, make them come to us, and shoot anything that comes through that door. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Welcome to the party, kid. Elias had managed to sit up, his back against the wall, pressing the cloth to his shoulder with his good hand. Colt's right. This jail's the strongest building in town. We hold it long enough. Maybe the territorial marshal hears about this. Maybe he sends help. How long is long enough? Thomas asked. However long we've got bullets. They spent the next 3 minutes preparing. Colt positioned David at the east window, Thomas at the west, himself at the door. Elias, wounded but still mobile, would reload and pass ammunition. The clock struck 9. Wade's patience ran out. The first shot came from the north, punching through the boards over the window and spraying splinters across the office. Then came a fusillade, bullets hammering the jail from 3 sides at once, a wall of lead that would have cut down anyone stupid enough to be standing in the open. But they weren't in the open. They were behind stone walls and heavy timber, and every bullet that didn't find flesh was just noise. Colt waited, watching through the gaps, counting muzzle flashes. 9 men, just like Thomas had said. They were spread out, using the buildings across the street for cover, firing in coordinated volleys that spoke of military training, or at least a lot of practice killing people. Hold your fire, Colt said quietly. Let them waste ammunition. The shooting went on for 2 full minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Smoke drifted across the street in lazy curls. Wade's voice. You boys done hiding yet? Colt risked a look. Wade was still mounted, sitting his horse in the middle of the street like he was bulletproof. Maybe he thought he was. Here's how this goes, Wade shouted. You surrender now. I'll make it quick. You keep fighting, and I start with the women and children. Elias tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He's bluffing. Maybe, Colt said, or maybe he's already sent men to the church. The thought hit them all at the same time. The church, where Maeve and Lila were hiding with every other woman and child in town. He wouldn't, David said. Even Wade Talbot wouldn't. Wade Talbot burned a Cheyenne village because someone stole his horse, Colt cut in. He'd burn the church and roast marshmallows over the ashes if it served his purpose. Then we have to stay here, Colt said flatly. The second we leave this jail, we're dead. And dead men don't protect anyone. But Maeve is smart enough to keep people quiet and hidden. The church cellar's solid. Unless Wade knows for sure she's there, he won't waste time searching. Colt was trying to convince himself as much as the others. Our job is to keep his attention here. How? By shooting back. Colt moved to the window, found a good angle, and squeezed off 3 rounds at the building across the street where he'd seen muzzle flash. Was rewarded with the sound of breaking glass and a yelp of pain. 1 down, he said. 8 to go. The return fire was immediate and furious, bullets punching through the boards and whining off the stone walls. David fired twice from his position, then ducked back as the window frame above him exploded in a shower of splinters. They're moving, Thomas called. 2 of them, trying to flank around the south side. Colt shifted position, saw them. 2 riders spurring their horses toward the alley that ran behind the jail. If they made it, they'd have a clear shot at the back door, which wasn't nearly as reinforced as the front. He stepped into the doorway, threw it open, and fired 4 times in rapid succession. The first rider went down, tumbling from his saddle. The second wheeled his horse and galloped back to cover, trailing blood. 2 down, Colt amended, slamming the door shut just as a bullet carved splinters from the frame where his head had been. 7 to go. But the math wasn't in their favor. 7 killers against 4 defenders, and one of the defenders was bleeding out against the wall. They might hold the jail for an hour, maybe 2 if they were lucky and ammunition held. But eventually Wade would get impatient, would use that dynamite, and then it wouldn't matter how solid the walls were. They needed a miracle. What they got was worse. The shooting stopped again. And this time when Colt looked out, he saw Wade dismounting, saw him walking toward the jail with his hands held away from his guns, saw the confidence in every step. He's coming to talk, David said. He's coming to gloat, Colt corrected. Wade stopped about 30 feet from the door, well out of pistol range, but close enough that they could see his face clearly. close enough to see the contempt in his eyes. "Colt Varren," Wade called. "I know you're in there. Recognized your shooting style. Come on out and let's talk about old times." Colt said nothing. "No? Well, that's all right. I'll talk, you listen." Wade pulled a cigar from his pocket, lit it with a match struck on his boot heel. "You cost me 3 good men 7 years ago. Been carrying that debt ever since. Figured I'd never get a chance to collect. Then I heard you rode into Ash Hollow, and I thought, well now, ain't that Providence?" Still Colt remained silent. "See, I could burn you out right now. Got enough dynamite to bring that whole jail down on your heads, but where's the fun in that?" Wade took a long pull on his cigar, exhaled smoke that drifted in the still air. "I want you to come out here and face me. Just you and me, like men. You win, my boys ride away and leave this town standing. I win. Well, I win everything." "Don't do it," Elias said from the floor. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Colt replied. "Question is whether it's a trap I can use." He opened the door and stepped out into the sunlight. The street was empty except for Wade and the bodies of the men Colt had already killed. Somewhere in the buildings, the rest of Wade's gang was watching, weapons ready, waiting for the signal to end this. "There he is," Wade said, smiling around his cigar. "The great Colt Varren. You look like shit, by the way." "Been a rough few weeks." "I'll bet. Heard you took a bullet down near Silver Creek. Heard you should be dead already." Wade's eyes narrowed. "What brings you back here? This ain't your town. These ain't your people." "Maybe I got tired of running. Or maybe there's a woman." Wade's smile sharpened. "That's it, isn't it? The sheriff's pretty wife. Heard she knew you back in the day. Heard you broke her heart and ran off to play hero somewhere else." Colt's hand twitched toward his gun. "Easy," Wade said. "We're just talking. For now." He took another pull on the cigar. "Here's what I'm thinking. You and me, we draw. Fair and square, cleanest fight you ever saw. You're faster, you win, my boys ride out. I'm faster. Well, then I get to finish what I started. Burn this town. Kill that sheriff. Maybe pay a visit to his wife and daughter. See what all the fuss was about. You touch them, and I'll kill you." "You'll try. But you're already dead, Colt. You just haven't figured it out yet." Wade dropped the cigar, ground it under his heel. "So what do you say? One last fight? Winner takes all?" Colt looked at him, at this man who'd burned villages and murdered families and left a trail of bodies across 3 territories. Looked at the death in his eyes and the certainty of it. The absolute knowledge that he would win because he always won. Because men like Wade Talbot didn't lose to half-dead gunfighters with bullet holes in their ribs. "All right," Colt said, "let's dance." They stood 30 feet apart in the dusty street, the sun climbing toward noon, shadows shortening toward nothing. Somewhere a shutter banged, somewhere a dog barked. But here in the space between them, there was only silence and the promise of blood. "Whenever you're ready," Wade said. Colt's hand hung loose at his side, fingers curled slightly, ready to grab leather. His ribs screamed at him, the wound pulling with every breath. His vision was starting to narrow at the edges, exhaustion and blood loss catching up with him. He thought about Maeve's face, about the daughter he'd never known, about all the ways his life could have gone different if he'd just been braver, smarter, better. Then he stopped thinking and just moved. His hand was fast. Faster than it had any right to be after 3 weeks of bleeding and 150 miles of hard riding. The gun came up smooth, the hammer falling with a sound like the world ending. But Wade was faster. The bullet hit Colt high in the chest, punching through muscle and bone and everything that kept a man upright. He fired anyway, saw his shot go wide, saw Wade's second bullet coming, but couldn't quite move his body to avoid it. The second round took him in the side, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Wade laughing. "Told you," Wade said, walking toward him with his smoking gun still in hand. "You're already dead." Colt tried to lift his pistol, but his arm wouldn't respond. Tried to stand, but his legs had stopped working. Tried to do anything except kneel there, bleeding into the dirt, while Wade Talbot stood over him like a monument to everything cruel and wrong in the world. "Any last words?" Wade asked. Colt looked up at him, tasted blood in his mouth, and smiled. "Yeah. Look behind you." Wade turned. The street that had been empty was now filled with people. Not many, maybe 20, maybe less. But they were there.
Men and women, some with weapons and some with nothing but the kind of desperate courage that came from watching someone else bleed for you and finally deciding it was time to stand. At the front stood Maeve, holding a rifle like she knew which end the bullets came out of. "You want to get to him," she said, her voice carrying across the distance. "You go through us first." Wade's gang started to raise their weapons, but they were outnumbered now, outflanked by townspeople who'd found their spine too late to save Colt, but maybe in time to save themselves. "This ain't over," Wade said, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is," Elias said from the jail doorway, his good arm holding a rifle trained on Wade's chest. "You lost, Talbot.
Right away while you still can." For a long moment, Wade stood frozen between rage and reason. Then he holstered his gun, mounted his horse, and looked down at Colt with something like respect. "Next time," Wade said. "There won't be a next time," Colt managed through the blood. "I'm done." Wade laughed and rode away, his remaining men falling in behind him, leaving Ash Hollow to its dead and its wounded and the terrible reckoning that came after violence. Maeve reached Colt first, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands going to his wounds. "Don't you dare die on me." "Wasn't planning on it," he lied. "Where's Doc Mercer?" Maeve shouted. "Someone get the doctor!" People were moving, running, calling out, but it all felt very far away to Colt. The sky above was impossibly blue, the kind of blue he remembered from childhood before everything went wrong. Lila's face appeared above him, those green eyes wide with fear and something else, something that looked like recognition.
"Mama," she said quietly, "why does he have my eyes?" And there it was, the question that had been waiting 16 years to be asked. Maeve looked at her daughter, then at Colt, and all the lies and secrets and careful silences finally shattered. "Because," she said, her voice breaking, "he's your father." The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire, impossible to call back, reshaping everything they touched. Lila's face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat: confusion, disbelief, anger, something that might have been recognition, before settling into a kind of stunned stillness that made her look younger than her 15 years. "What?" The word came out barely above a whisper. Maeve's hands were still pressed against Colt's chest, trying to slow the bleeding, but her eyes were locked on her daughter's face. "Lila, I can explain." "You're lying!" Lila took a step back, her voice rising. "You're lying, Mama. Papa is my father. He's always been my father." "Elias is your father in every way that matters," Maeve said, her voice cracking. "He raised you. He loves you. He chose you." "But he's not." Lila looked at Colt, at his face going pale from blood loss, at the green eyes that matched her own. "He's not my real father." "Lila." The girl turned and ran, disappearing into the crowd of townspeople who were still milling about in the street, unsure whether to celebrate their survival or mourn what it had cost. Maeve started to rise, to go after her, but Colt's hand caught her wrist. His grip was weak, his fingers cold. "Let her go," he managed. "She needs time. She needs the truth. She just got it. Now she needs to figure out what to do with it." Colt coughed, tasted blood. "Help me up." "You can't move. You're shot. I've been shot before. Usually turns out fine." He tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Well, fine-ish." Doc Mercer arrived then, pushing through the crowd with his black bag and the harried expression of a man who'd just treated a sheriff with a shoulder wound and wasn't happy about having to patch up another fool who'd gotten himself ventilated. "Lord have mercy," Mercer muttered, kneeling beside Colt. "You trying to die or just practicing for when you get serious about it?" "Little of both." Mercer's hands were already moving, probing the wounds with practiced efficiency. "Bullet went through clean on the side. The chest wound's worse. Lung might be nicked." He looked up at the crowd. "I need a table. Someone get me a door, planks, anything flat. And boil water, lots of it." 4 men stepped forward, lifting Colt as gently as they could. The movement sent lightning through his body, white hot and blinding. He bit down on a scream, felt Maeve's hand grip his, heard her voice like it was coming from underwater. "Stay with me, Colt. Don't you dare leave now." They carried him into the jail, where Elias was already stretched out on Mercer's makeshift surgery table, 2 doors laid across barrels.
The sheriff looked like hell, his face waxy and drawn, but he was conscious and his eyes tracked clearly when they brought Colt in. "He alive?" Elias asked. "For now," Mercer said. "Move him to the floor. I'll work on him after I finish with you." "No." Elias tried to sit up, winced. "Work on him first."
Sheriff, you're still bleeding. I'm not dying in the next 10 minutes. He might be." Elias's voice carried the weight of command, the kind that made people listen even when they wanted to argue. "Save him first, Doc. That's an order." Mercer looked between them, saw something in Elias's face that made him nod. "All right, but you keep pressure on that shoulder and you don't move. Understand?" They laid Colt on the table and Mercer went to work. The world narrowed to pain and the doctor's hands and Maeve's face hovering above him, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You should go find Lila," Colt said. "I should stay here and make sure you don't die. She needs you more than I do." That's not true, and we both know it. Maeve's hand was in his hair now, gentle and familiar, like no time had passed at all. "You've been dying by inches for 16 years. I'm not going to let you finish the job now." "Romantic," Colt managed. "Morbid, but romantic. Shut up and let the doctor work." Mercer had cut away Colt's shirt and was cleaning the wounds with something that burned like liquid fire. Colt could feel himself starting to drift, the edges of his vision going soft and dark. "Stay awake," Mercer commanded. "You go to sleep now. You might not wake up." "Sounds peaceful." "Colt," Maeve's voice cut through the fog. "Stay with me. You hear me? You don't get to run away this time. You stay and you fight, and you live." "Why?" "Because I'm not done being angry at you yet." Her fingers tightened in his hair. "Because Lila deserves to know her father. Because Elias risked his life for you, and you owe him better than bleeding out on his floor. Because—" her voice broke. "Because I never stopped loving you, you stupid, impossible man. And if you die now, I will never forgive you." The words hit him harder than Wade's bullets. He looked up at her, at the woman who'd waited 6 months before marrying someone else, who'd raised his daughter and built a life, and somehow kept a piece of her heart locked away with his name on it. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll stay." He didn't remember much after that. The pain became something distant and abstract, like it was happening to someone else. Mercer's voice, calm and methodical, talking about trajectory and tissue damage, and how lucky Colt was that the chest wound had missed anything immediately fatal. The sound of instruments clinking, the smell of blood and antiseptic. Maeve's hand never leaving his. At some point, he must have passed out despite Mercer's warnings, because when he opened his eyes again, the light had changed. Late afternoon sun slanted through the jail windows, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. He was on a cot in one of the cells, the door standing open. His chest was wrapped in clean bandages that were only slightly spotted with blood. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache that he could almost ignore if he didn't breathe too deep. Elias was in the other cell, also bandaged, also awake. They looked at each other across the narrow space. "You look terrible," Elias said. "You're one to talk." "Fair point." Elias shifted slightly, testing his mobility. "Doc says you'll live. Says the bullet missed your lung by about an inch. Any closer, and we'd be burying you tomorrow." "How long was I out?" 4 hours, give or take. Mercer kept checking on you, making sure you were still breathing." Elias paused. "Maeve stayed the whole time. Only left about 20 minutes ago when Thomas told her Lila was holed up in the schoolhouse." Colt closed his eyes. "She say anything, Lila?" "Not to me, but then I'm not exactly in a position to go chasing after her." The bitterness in Elias's voice was impossible to miss. "I didn't come here to blow up your family." "I know, but you did it anyway." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I always knew this day would come, that eventually she'd start asking questions I couldn't answer, that eventually you'd ride back into town and everything I'd built would fall apart. You built a good life, raised a good daughter. Maeve's lucky to have you." "Is she? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like she's been waiting 16 years for the man who left her." Elias's voice was heavy with something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite resignation, something sadder and more complicated. "I've loved her every day of our marriage, tried to be the husband she deserved, the father Lila needed,
But there's a part of her I could never touch. A place where she kept you locked away like a secret she wasn't willing to let go.
That's not fair to her. Maybe not, but it's true. Elias turned to look at him fully.
You want to know something funny? I used to hate you. Used to lie awake at night imagining all the ways I'd make you suffer if you ever came back. But now that you're here, now that I've seen you fight and bleed and nearly die for this town, I can't hate you. I just feel sorry for both of us. Why? Because we both love the same woman, and neither of us can make her whole. The words settled into the space between them, heavy as stones. Before Colt could respond, the jail door opened and David came in, looking older than he had that morning. The kid had fought, had stood his ground, had earned the badge he wore. But there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before, the knowledge of what violence actually cost. "Sheriff," David said to Elias, "Councilman Marsh wants to see you. Says it's urgent. Tell him I'm indisposed. He's got half the town council with him. Says they need to discuss your future as sheriff." Elias laughed, a sound without humor. "My future? That's rich. Tell them I'll meet with them tomorrow, after I can stand without bleeding through my bandages." "Yes, sir." David hesitated. "For what it's worth, there's a lot of folks out there who saw what you did, who saw you stand up when everyone else was hiding. They're saying you're a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who is too stubborn to run." "Sometimes that's the same thing." David nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Colt tried to sit up, managed to prop himself on one elbow before the pain forced him back down. "You think they'll actually remove you?" "Probably. Town like this doesn't want a sheriff who causes trouble. They want someone who keeps his head down and doesn't attract men like Wade Talbot." Elias stared at the ceiling. "Can't say I blame them. Before you showed up, this was a quiet place. Now we've got 2 dead men in the street and a jail that looks like it went through a war. Those men would have come whether I was here or not. Rafe Cutter made sure of that when he killed those people. Maybe, or maybe if I'd just let him go, none of this would have happened." "You did the right thing." "Did I? Because from here it looks like I nearly got my wife and daughter killed over principle." Elias's voice was hollow. "I stood up for the law, and the law cost me everything that matters. You haven't lost them yet." "Haven't I?" Elias turned to look at him. "Maeve just told our daughter that I'm not her real father, that the man she's supposed to call Papa is actually some gunfighter she barely knows. You think that doesn't change everything?" "Elias, I need you to be honest with me, Colt. What do you want? You want Maeve back? You want to be Lila's father? You want to waltz back into their lives and pretend the last 16 years didn't happen?" The questions cut deep because Colt didn't have answers. Didn't know what he wanted beyond making it through the next day without dying. Didn't know if he had any right to want anything from the family he'd abandoned. "I don't know," he admitted. "I came here because Maeve asked, because Wade was coming and you needed help. But what happens now? I haven't thought that far ahead." "Well, you'd better start thinking, because Lila's going to want answers and Maeve's going to want decisions, and I'm going to want to know whether I'm still part of my own family." Before Colt could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Maeve, her face drawn and tired, her dress still stained with Colt's blood. "She won't talk to me," Maeve said without preamble. "Won't even open the door. Just keeps saying she needs time to think." "Did you tell her?" Elias started. "I told her everything. About Colt and me before you. About Samuel Harding and why Colt left. About you choosing to marry me knowing I was pregnant with another man's child." Maeve sank into a chair, suddenly looking fragile in a way Colt had never seen. "I told her you loved her from the moment she was born. That you were her real father in every way that counted." "And what did she say?" "She said she needed to think about what real means." The 3 of them sat in silence, each lost in their own private version of the same wreckage. Finally, Colt spoke. "I should leave." "What?" Maeve looked up sharply. "Soon as I can ride, I should clear out. Let you all figure this out without me complicating things." "That's your solution?" Maeve's voice was rising. "Run away again?" "It's what I'm good at." "No. What you're good at is breaking things and then leaving other people to clean up the mess." She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't get to do that this time. You don't get to show up, turn our lives upside down, and then disappear into the sunset like some tragic hero.
You're staying and you're facing what you've done. Maeve, you're staying and you're going to talk to your daughter. You're going to explain to her why you left and why you never came back. You're going to answer every question she has, no matter how much it hurts. And then, only then, do you get to decide whether you leave or stay. What if she doesn't want to talk to me? Then you wait until she does. You sit in this town and you wait and you prove that you're capable of staying for something instead of running from it. Colt looked at Elias. You okay with this? Elias was quiet for a long moment. No, I'm not okay with any of this. But Maeve's right. Lila deserves answers, and you're the only one who can give them to her. He met Colt's eyes. But understand something. I'm her father. I've been her father for 15 years. You might be the man who gave her life, but I'm the one who taught her to walk and read and ride. I'm the one who sat with her through nightmares and sickness. You don't get to just step in and take that from me. I wouldn't, maybe you wouldn't mean to, but it'll happen anyway, because she's smart and curious, and she's going to want to know the man who shares her eyes. Elias's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. All I'm asking is that you remember I was here first, that I earned my place in her life. I will, I swear it. Maeve looked between them, these two men who'd both loved her in their own broken ways. I need air. I can't be in here right now. She left, the door closing softly behind her. The sun was setting now, painting the cell walls in shades of red and orange. Somewhere in town, people were cleaning up after the battle, burying the dead, trying to return to normal. But in the jail, two wounded men lay in adjacent cells and contemplated the ruins of certainty. You really love her? Elias asked after a while. Always have. Probably always will. Even after 16 years? Especially after 16 years, because I've spent all that time knowing what I lost. Colt shifted, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes it's just another thing you carry that weighs you down. That's about the saddest thing I've ever heard. Welcome to my world. They lapsed into silence again, broken only by the sounds of the town outside and their own labored breathing. Night fell properly, bringing with it a chill that seeped through the stone walls. Doc Mercer came by to check on them, changed bandages, gave them each a dose of laudanum that Colt refused, and Elias accepted gratefully. You should sleep, Mercer told Colt. Body heals faster when you're not conscious to fight it. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Keep this up. That'll be sooner than you think. Mercer packed his bag. I'll be back in the morning. Try not to bleed out before then. After he left, Thomas appeared with plates of food that neither man had much appetite for. The stable hand looked exhausted, his face lined with the kind of fatigue that came from surviving something you shouldn't have. Town's settling down, Thomas reported. Most folks have come back from wherever they were hiding. Couple of families already left, figured they'd take their chances elsewhere rather than wait for Wade to come back. He won't come back, Colt said. How can you be sure? Because I know Wade. He makes his play, wins or loses, and moves on. Coming back would be admitting he didn't finish the job right the first time. That's not how he operates. Hope you're right. Thomas set the plates down. Saw Maeve heading to the schoolhouse. Think she's trying to talk to Lila again. How long you think the girl will hold out? Elias asked. As long as it takes. She's stubborn, that one. Gets it from both sides. Thomas gave Colt a meaningful look. You planning to stick around? Seems I don't have much choice. Well, you always have a choice. Question is whether you're brave enough to make the right one. Thomas headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you should stay. Not for Maeve, not for Elias, but for Lila. That girl deserves to know where she comes from. After Thomas left, Elias spoke into the darkness. He's right, you know. About what? About staying. About being brave enough to face what you've done. Elias's voice was tired but clear. I've spent 15 years being the safe choice, the reliable one, the man who showed up every day. But you're the dangerous one, the legend, the man who rode away and became a story. I'm not a legend. I'm just a killer with a reputation. That's what makes you dangerous. Lila's at that age where she wants adventure, wants to believe the world is bigger than this town. You represent all of that. You're the possibility that life could be more than safe and stable and predictable. That's not a good thing. No, but it's a powerful thing,
And you need to understand that before you talk to her. Need to understand that whatever you say, whatever you do, it's going to shape how she sees herself. Colt thought about that. Thought about a 15-year-old girl trying to reconcile the father who raised her with the father who gave her life. Thought about the weight of legacy and blood and all the ways parents failed their children just by being human. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted. Neither did I when Lila was born. But I learned, made mistakes, apologized for them, tried to do better the next day. Elias shifted in his cot. That's all any of us can do. Show up and try. They fell silent again, and this time Colt let himself drift towards sleep. The laudanum he'd refused earlier would have helped, but he'd learned long ago that sleep medicated was sleep without dreams, and dreams were where he did his best thinking. He dreamed of Maeve as she'd been at 20, laughing by the creek with her skirts hiked up and her feet in the water. Dreamed of Samuel Harding's face in the moment before Colt pulled the trigger, the surprise and rage and final understanding. Dreamed of a baby he'd never seen, green eyes opening for the first time in a world that didn't include him. When he woke, it was deep night, and someone was sitting beside his cot. Lila. She sat perfectly still in the darkness, her face unreadable, her hands folded in her lap. How long she'd been there, Colt couldn't say, but she was there now, and that was what mattered. Hey, he said quietly, not wanting to spook her. You're awake. Hard to sleep with holes in you. She didn't smile, just kept looking at him with those eyes that were so like his own it was almost painful. Mama said you killed a man for her, Lila said finally. I did. She said he was going to hurt her, that you didn't have a choice. I had a choice. I could have walked away. Could have let the law handle it, but I was young and angry, and I thought the fastest way to solve a problem was with a gun. Colt tried to sit up, managed it on the second try. I made a lot of choices back then that I regret. Do you regret me? The question landed like a blow. No, never. Colt's voice was fierce, more emotion in those two words than he'd shown in years. You're the one thing I did right, even if I did it by accident and then ran away from it. Then why didn't you come back? And there it was, the question she'd been building toward. Mama said you were wanted by the law, that you couldn't come back safely. But you came back now, didn't you? You came back when she asked. So why not before? Why not when I was little and might have actually wanted a father instead of just being confused about who my father is? Colt had no good answer for that, no excuse that didn't sound like the cowardice it was. Because I was scared, he said finally. Scared of the law, yeah, but more scared of what I'd find. Scared your mother had built a good life without me. Scared you'd look at me and see a stranger. Scared I'd mess everything up just by showing up. So you stayed away. So I stayed away. That's stupid. Yeah, it is. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Mama cried tonight. I heard her through the door. She was trying to be quiet, but I heard her anyway. She's been through a lot today. She's been through a lot for 16 years. Lila's voice was sharp, angry in the way only a teenager could be angry, all raw feeling and no filter. She married Papa because you left her pregnant and alone. She built a whole life around the hole you left behind. And now you show up and nearly die, and she has to feel everything all over again. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just keep hurting people and calling it love. The words cut deep because they were true. You're right, Colt said. I've been selfish and stupid, and I've hurt the people who deserved better. But I'm here now. And I know that doesn't fix anything, doesn't change the past, but maybe it's a start. A start to what? To being someone you don't have to be ashamed of. Lila studied him, her face unreadable in the dim light. Papa says you're a killer, that you've killed 23 men. 25 now, if you count today. Does it bother you, killing people? Every single time. Then why do you keep doing it? Because sometimes it's the only choice left. Because the world is full of men like Wade Talbot, who don't care about law or decency or anything except what they want. And someone has to stand against them. Is that what you tell yourself so you can sleep at night? Colt almost smiled. I don't sleep much at night. Lila was quiet again, thinking. When she spoke, her voice was smaller, younger. Are you going to leave again? I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got. I don't know what happens next. Don't know if your mother wants me here. If Elias can stand having me around. If the law's going to catch up with me." He looked at her fully, this girl who was half him and half Maeve and entirely her own person. "But I know I want to stay. Want to know you. Want to be, something. Not a replacement for Elias because he's earned his place as your father, but maybe someone who can answer questions about where you came from. I came from Mama, and you making a mistake. No. You came from Maeve and me loving each other when we were too young to understand what love actually cost. The mistake wasn't you. The mistake was me thinking I could run from responsibility and call it heroism." Lila stood suddenly, her face conflicted. "I need to go. I needed to see you, to see if you were real or just another story Mama told herself to make sense of her life." "And? Am I real?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah, you're real. And that might be worse than the story." She left before Colt could respond, slipping out into the night like a ghost. Across the cell block, Elias stirred. "You awake?" "Yeah. Heard all that. Figured. She'll come around. Give her time. What if time's not enough? What if she decides I'm not worth knowing? Then you live with it, because that's her choice to make, not yours." Elias was quiet for a beat. "But I don't think that's what'll happen. I think she's curious. Thinks she's angry and confused, but underneath it all, she wants to know you. Wants to understand where that restless part of her comes from. The restless part is going to get her in trouble. Probably. But that's what fathers are for. To help pick up the pieces when curiosity leads to catastrophe." Elias's voice carried something that might have been a smile. "Welcome to parenthood, Varren. It's terrifying and awful, and the best thing you'll never be good enough at." Colt lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a girl with green eyes and a stubborn mouth, and all the ways he'd already failed her without even trying. Outside, Ash Hollow settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that came after violence, when people had survived something they shouldn't have and weren't quite sure what to do with the aftermath. In the jail, two fathers waited for morning and whatever it would bring. Morning came with this kind of light that made everything look clean and new, as if the previous day's violence had never happened. But the bloodstains in the street told a different story, dark patches in the dust that no amount of sunrise could wash away. Colt woke to the sound of voices in the outer office. He sat up slowly, testing his body's willingness to cooperate. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but manageable. He'd lived through worse and probably would again if he didn't do something monumentally stupid in the next few days. Elias was already awake in the next cell, sitting on the edge of his cot with his injured arm held close to his body. His face was drawn but alert, listening to the conversation beyond the door. "That's Marsh," Elias said quietly, "and it sounds like he brought the whole council. Want me to throw them out?" "No, might as well face it now." Elias stood, moving carefully. "Help me with my shirt?" Colt crossed to Elias's cell and helped him work the shirt over his bandaged shoulder. It was an oddly intimate moment, one man helping another dress for battle of a different kind, the kind fought with words and politics instead of bullets. The door opened and Councilman Marsh entered, flanked by 4 other men in suits that marked them as the town's prosperous class. Men who'd hidden in their cellars yesterday while others bled in the street. "Sheriff Brody," Marsh said, his voice carrying false warmth. "Good to see you up and about. We were worried." "Were you?" Elias's tone was flat. "Funny, I don't remember seeing any of you when Wade Talbot was shooting up the town." Marsh had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Yes, well, we felt it prudent to ensure the civilian population remained safe." "You mean you hid?" "We made strategic decisions about resource allocation." "You hid," Elias repeated, "while men died in the street, while this town nearly burned. You hid in your cellars and waited for someone else to solve your problems." One of the other councilmen, a thin man with spectacles, cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, Sheriff, we have concerns about recent events, specifically your handling of the Cutter situation." "My handling?" "I arrested a murderer, tried him, and executed him according to territorial law. That's called doing my job. You also brought Wade Talbot and his gang down on this town, Cost us 3 dead, property damage, and the security of our citizens. Wade Talbot came because Rafe Cutter was his friend. That would have happened whether I hanged him or not. The only difference is whether we stand for law or let outlaws dictate our justice. Marsh stepped forward, his hands spread in a conciliatory gesture. No one's questioning your commitment to the law, Elias. But we have to consider the greater good. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. Discretion.
Elias's laugh was harsh. That what you call cowardice now? Now see here. No, you see here. Elias moved toward them, his voice rising. You appointed me sheriff because you wanted someone who'd make this town look civilized, someone who'd keep things quiet and orderly so your property values stayed high and your businesses stayed profitable.
But when it came time to actually stand for something, when civilization required courage instead of just a badge, where were you? The councilman shifted uncomfortably, none quite meeting his eyes. That's what I thought. Elias pulled the badge from his vest, held it up to catch the morning light. You want this back? Fine. Take it. Appoint Frank Holloway or whoever else you think will do your bidding. But understand something. The law doesn't work if it only applies when it's convenient. It doesn't mean anything if we abandon it the moment someone threatens us. He tossed the badge to Marsh, who caught it reflexively. You're making a mistake, Marsh said. No, I made a mistake thinking this town deserved someone who'd fight for it, but I'm done making that mistake. The councilmen left, taking Elias's badge with them and leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any words. Colt watched Elias stand there, shoulders squared despite the pain, and felt something shift in his understanding of the man who'd married Maeve. This wasn't weakness disguised as principle. This was strength that ran deep enough to walk away from power rather than compromise. You didn't have to do that, Colt said. Yeah, I did. Been compromising myself for this town's comfort for too long. Time I remembered who I was before I put on that badge. Who are you? Elias smiled faintly. A school teacher. Came west to educate frontier children, ended up marrying their reading instructor and wearing a star because no one else would. Funny how life works out. You going back to teaching? If they'll have me. If Maeve still wants me around after everything that's happened. Elias moved to the window looking out at the town that had just rejected him. Strange thing is, I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. Before Colt could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Doc Mercer, carrying his black bag and wearing the expression of a man who dealt with too much human stupidity in too short a time. Heard Marsh and his cronies were here, Mercer said. Heard they took your badge. News travels fast. It's a small town. People talk. Mercer set his bag down, started examining Elias's shoulder. For what it's worth, I think they're fools. You're the best sheriff this place has seen in 20 years. Not anymore. No. Now you're just a man who did the right thing and got punished for it. Story old as time. Mercer finished with Elias, moved to Colt. How are you feeling? Like I got shot twice? Accurate assessment. Mercer unwrapped the bandages, studied the wounds with clinical detachment. Healing started. No infection yet, though. Give it time. You should be dead, you know. That chest wound was a finger's width from your heart. I've got a talent for not dying. More like a talent for getting shot in convenient places. Mercer rewrapped the bandages with efficient movements. You'll live. Might even make it to next week if you don't do anything stupid. No promises. Mercer packed his bag. Maeve was asking about you. Wanted to know if you could walk. Why? Didn't say. But she had that look women get when they've made a decision and the world better get out of the way. Mercer headed for the door. I'd brace myself if I were you. After he left, Colt and Elias looked at each other. That sounded ominous, Colt said. That's Maeve. She doesn't do anything by halves. Elias tested his arm's range of motion, winced. You love her, don't you? Still, after everything. Yeah. And if she asked you to stay, to build a life here, be a father to Lila, all of it? Colt thought about the question. Thought about 16 years of running, of never putting down roots, of keeping himself separate from anything that might require him to stay. Thought about the warrant that still hung over him, the enemies he'd made, the violence that followed him like a shadow. I don't know if I'm capable of that, he admitted. Don't know if I can be the man she needs, the man Lila deserves.
None of us know if we're capable until we try. I sure as hell didn't think I could raise another man's child and love her like my own. But I did. Because love isn't about capability. It's about showing up every day and doing your best, even when your best isn't good enough. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the only thing that matters. Elias moved toward the door. I'm going to find Maeve.
You coming? Colt stood, his body protesting but obeying. Where would she be? If I know her, she's at the schoolhouse. It's where she goes when she needs to think. They walked through town together, two wounded men in a place that had rejected one and never wanted the other. People stared as they passed, some with gratitude, some with resentment, most with the kind of complicated mix that came from being saved by someone you'd rather have ignored. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a small wooden building with rows of desks and a chalkboard that still held yesterday's lessons. Maeve stood at the front of the room, staring at the board like it held answers instead of arithmetic. She turned when they entered, her face unreadable. I heard about the badge, she said to Elias. News travels. Are you all right? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. Elias crossed to her, took her hand with his good one. I'm sorry for all of this, for bringing violence to our door, for nearly getting us killed, for... Stop. Maeve's voice was gentle but firm. You did what you thought was right. You stood for something when everyone else was willing to compromise. I'm proud of you. Even if it cost me the badge, especially because it cost you the badge, shows you care about justice more than power. She looked past Elias to where Colt stood near the door, keeping his distance. Both of you did. Both of you stood when you could have run. Is Lila here? Colt asked. She went to the creek, said she needed to think. Maeve's expression softened slightly. She came to see you last night. Did she say anything? Enough. Asked hard questions I didn't have good answers for. That's Lila. She's been asking hard questions since she learned to talk. Maeve released Elias's hand, moved toward Colt. I need to tell you something. Both of you. The men waited. I've spent 16 years trying to build a life that made sense, Maeve said. Trying to be the woman this town needed, the wife Elias deserved, the mother Lila could be proud of. And I did it. I built something good and solid and safe, but there was always a piece missing, a hole I tried to fill with routine and responsibility and telling myself I was happy enough. She looked at Colt. Then you rode back into town and everything I'd convinced myself of fell apart, because seeing you reminded me of who I was before I learned to be careful, before I learned that love wasn't enough to survive on, before I traded passion for security and told myself it was the smart choice. Maeve, Elias started, let me finish. She turned to him. You've been good to me, better than I probably deserved. You married me knowing I was carrying another man's child. You raised Lila as your own. You gave us stability and respect and a place in this community. And I love you for that. I do love you, Elias. But? Elias's voice was quiet. But it's not the same as what I felt for Colt. It's different, safer, more sustainable, but not, she struggled for the word, not consuming. Not the kind of love that makes you stupid and reckless and willing to burn the world for one more day together. Elias nodded slowly, like he'd always known this but needed to hear her say it. So what happens now? I don't know, because I love you both, just in different ways. And Lila loves you, Elias. You're her father in every way that counts. But she also deserves to know Colt, deserves to understand where she comes from. What are you saying? Colt asked. Maeve looked between them. I'm saying I can't choose, won't choose, because this isn't about what I want anymore. It's about what's best for Lila. And what's best is having both of you in her life. Having Elias's steadiness and your, whatever it is you bring, your honesty maybe, your willingness to stand and fight even when you know you'll lose. That's not sustainable, Elias said gently. You can't split yourself between two men indefinitely. I'm not talking about splitting myself. I'm talking about all of us figuring out how to exist in the same space. How to be family in a way that doesn't fit the normal pattern. Maeve's voice grew stronger. Lila needs a father
who'll teach her to be good and steady and responsible. But she also needs to know the man who gave her those restless eyes and that stubborn streak. She needs both of you. And what about us? Colt asked. What about what we want? What do you want, Colt? Really want? Underneath all that running and dying and pretending you don't need anything or anyone? The question hit him like a physical blow, because he'd spent so long not wanting, not hoping, not letting himself imagine a future that lasted longer than the next town or the next fight. I want to stay, he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Want to know my daughter. Want to wake up in a place that feels like home instead of just another stop on the way to nowhere. He looked at Maeve. Want to see if what we had can become something different, something that works for who we are now instead of who we were at 20. And you? Maeve turned to Elias. Can you live with this? With Colt being part of our lives? Elias was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was measured, thoughtful. I don't know. Part of me wants to say no, wants to demand you choose, wants to be the only father Lila knows. But that's not fair to her, and it's not fair to you. He looked at Colt. You planning to stay? Really stay, not just until you get bored or scared or Wade Talbot's cousin comes looking for revenge? I'm planning to try. Can't promise more than that. Then I can live with it. Can live with you being part of Lila's life, being part of this strange family we're building. Elias's jaw tightened. But understand something. You hurt Maeve again. You disappoint that girl. You bring more violence to our door. I will make you regret it. Badge or no badge, I will find a way. Fair enough? Maeve looked between them, something like relief washing over her face. So we're doing this? All of us together figuring it out as we go? Apparently, Elias said. Seems like it, Colt added. Good. Because Lila's at the creek and she needs to see both of you. Needs to see that her fathers, both of them, can be in the same place without the world ending. They found Lila exactly where Maeve said she'd be, sitting on the bank of the creek with her feet in the water, staring at the current like it held messages in its flow. She looked up when they approached, her face guarded. Mama sent you, she said. Not a question. She thought we should talk, Elias said, sitting down beside her with a slight grimace of pain. All of us together. Colt remained standing, unsure where he fit in this picture. Lila solved the problem by patting the ground on her other side. Sit. You look like you're about to fall over anyway. He sat, and for a moment the three of them just watched the water slide by. I've been thinking, Lila said finally, about what Mama told me, about you. She looked at Colt. About why you left and why you came back. And I'm still angry, still feel like you threw away something important because you were scared. But I also understand why she called you, why she thought we needed you. Why's that? Because Papa's good at keeping us safe, at building a life that works. But you're good at standing when standing means getting shot. And maybe we need both kinds of strength. Elias's hand found hers, squeezed gently. You're wise beyond your years, little bird. Don't call me that. I'm 15, not 5. But there was affection in her voice, the kind that came from years of familiarity and love. She turned to Colt. I don't know how to think of you yet. Don't know if I can call you father or if that word belongs to Papa. Don't know what you're supposed to be in my life. I don't know either, Colt admitted. I'm figuring it out same as you. But you're staying. You're not going to disappear again? I'm staying, long as the law doesn't catch up with me. Long as Wade Talbot doesn't have friends who want revenge. Long as you don't find another reason to run, Lila finished. That's what scares me. That you'll get comfortable and then something will happen and you'll remember you're better at leaving than staying. That's a fair fear. So what are you going to do about it? Colt looked at this girl who was so much smarter than he'd been at her age, who saw through excuses and demanded honesty even when it hurt. I'm going to stay anyway. Even when it's hard, even when I want to run, because you deserve better than a father who only shows up when it's easy. Do you promise? I promise to try. Can't promise I won't fail. Can't promise I'll be good at this. But I can promise I'll keep trying even when I mess up. Lila studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, that's enough for now.
They sat in silence, watching the water flow past, carrying away dirt and debris and all the things that didn't matter. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and somewhere in town life was going on, people working and talking and rebuilding what yesterday had broken. "What happens now?" Lila asked. "With the town? With Papa not being sheriff anymore? With all of it?" "We figure it out," Elias said. "I'll go back to teaching if they'll have me. Maeve will keep doing what she does. You'll keep growing up too fast and giving us gray hair." "And him?" Lila looked at Colt. "He'll find his place." Maeve's voice came from behind them. She'd followed quietly, giving them space to talk but staying close enough to help if needed. "Maybe he'll help Thomas at the livery. Maybe he'll do odd jobs around town. Maybe he'll just exist for a while without needing to be useful or dangerous or anything except present." "Can you do that?" Lila asked Colt. "Just exist without fighting?" "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." They stayed by the creek until the sun was high and direct, until the heat drove them back toward town and the complicated business of rebuilding lives that had been shattered and reformed. As they walked, Colt found himself between Maeve and Lila, with Elias on Lila's other side. An odd configuration, this family that didn't fit any normal pattern. 2 fathers and 1 daughter, 1 mother trying to hold it all together, all of them scarred and imperfect and somehow still trying. The town appeared ahead of them, and Colt braced himself for the stares and whispers. But what he got instead surprised him. People nodded as they passed. Some even spoke, quiet words of thanks or respect. The battle yesterday had changed something, had shifted how they saw him from dangerous outsider to someone who'd bled for them when he had no obligation to. Thomas was waiting at the livery, a grin splitting his weathered face. "Heard you gave up being sheriff," he said to Elias. "Seemed like the right move." "Good. Never suited you anyway. You're a teacher, always have been." Thomas turned to Colt. "You, on the other hand, I could use help with. Got 3 horses need breaking, fence that needs mending, and enough work for 2 men if you're interested." "I'm not exactly in fighting shape." "Don't need you to fight, need you to work. Show this town you're more than just a gun." Thomas's expression grew serious. "Besides, idle hands and all that. You need something to do or you'll start thinking, and thinking leads to drinking, and drinking leads to you doing something stupid like riding off into the sunset." "He's staying," Lila said firmly. "He promised." "Did he now?" Thomas looked at Colt with something like approval. "Well then, guess that settles it. You start tomorrow if you can stand upright for more than 5 minutes." "I'll manage." They moved on, and Colt felt something unfamiliar settling in his chest. Not quite hope. That was too strong a word for someone who'd spent 16 years disappointed. But possibility, maybe. The sense that the future might contain more than just survival and regret. The boarding house appeared, and Mrs. Chen stood on the porch sweeping like she hadn't just lived through a gunfight in the street. "You staying?" she asked Colt. "Looks like it." "Then you'll need a permanent room. Different rate for long term. $2 a week, meals included if you don't mind eating what I cook." "That's generous." "That's practical. You'll be working for Thomas, which means you'll be too tired to cause trouble. I like tenants who are too tired to cause trouble." She looked at Maeve. "You making an honest man of him?" We're not." Maeve flushed. "It's complicated." "It always is." Mrs. Chen went back to sweeping. "But complications have a way of sorting themselves out if you give them time." They continued toward Maeve and Elias's house, a modest structure on the edge of town, with a garden that showed Maeve's touch, and a porch that looked like it had hosted countless evening conversations. "You should come for dinner tonight," Maeve said to Colt, "all of us together. Start figuring out what this looks like." "You sure?" "No, but we're doing it anyway." She looked at Elias, who nodded. 7 o'clock, Elias said. "Don't be late. Maeve doesn't tolerate tardiness." "Never did," Colt agreed. They separated there, Maeve and Elias and Lila heading toward their home, while Colt made his way back to the boarding house. His steps were slow, his body reminding him with every movement that he'd been shot twice, and was operating on stubbornness and not much else. In his room, he lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. He'd come to Ash Hollow expecting to die for Maeve,
to go out in a blaze of violence that would at least mean something. Instead, he'd survived, and now he had to figure out how to live. The afternoon passed slowly. He dozed, woke, dozed again. Doc Mercer came by to check his wounds, pronounced him healing adequately, and left with instructions to rest and not do anything stupid. At 6:30, Colt got up and washed as best he could, changed into his other shirt, the one that wasn't stained with blood. Ran his fingers through his hair and tried to look like someone who belonged at a family dinner instead of a drifter who'd stumbled into something he didn't understand. The walk to Maeve's house took longer than it should have. He kept finding reasons to stop, to delay, to give himself time to figure out what he was doing. But 7 o'clock came regardless, and he found himself standing on the porch, his hand raised to knock. The door opened before he could. Lila stood there, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. "You came," she said. "I promised." "People break promises all the time." "Yeah, but I'm trying not to be like other people." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house was warm and lived in, full of small touches that spoke of a family that had built something real. Books on shelves, a quilt draped over a chair, photographs on the mantel showing Lila at various ages, always with Elias beside her, both of them smiling. Colt felt like an intruder in this space, like his presence contaminated something pure and good. But Maeve appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and her smile was genuine. "You made it. Wasn't sure I should. Neither was I, but we're doing this anyway." She gestured to the table, already set for 4. "Sit. Elias is carving the roast." They sat, and for a moment it was awkward. 4 people who didn't quite know how to be a family trying to pretend this was normal. Then Elias brought out the food, and the conversation started, halting at first but gaining momentum. They talked about small things, the weather, the town, Thomas's horses. Avoided the big topics like what came next and how they'd make this work, and whether Colt would still be here in a month. Lila asked him questions about where he'd been, what he'd seen. He answered carefully, leaving out the violence and keeping to the landscapes and the people who'd been kind. Maeve watched him with eyes that held both old love and new uncertainty. Elias was quiet mostly, but when he spoke it was without bitterness, just a man trying to navigate impossible waters with grace. After dinner, Lila excused herself to do homework. Elias went to the porch to smoke his pipe, leaving Colt and Maeve alone with the dishes. They worked in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that came from years of knowing someone. "This is strange," Maeve said finally. "Yeah. But not bad strange, just different. Different works." She handed him a plate to dry. "I meant what I said this morning, about loving you both, about not choosing." "I know. Can you live with that? With not having all of me?" Colt thought about it. Thought about 16 years of having none of her, of living with memories and regret and the ghost of what they'd been. "Having some of you is better than having none of you," he said, "and sharing you with a man who's earned his place seems fair." "You've earned your place too, just differently." "Have I?" "You came when I called. You fought when everyone else hid. You're trying to stay when every instinct tells you to run." She set down the dish she was washing, turned to face him fully. "That's earning it, Colt. That's showing up even when it's hard." He set down the towel, and for a moment they just looked at each other, seeing the people they'd become, the years that had changed them, the love that had somehow survived despite everything. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Don't know how to be part of a family." "Neither do I. Neither does Elias. Neither does Lila. We're all making it up as we go." She smiled. "But we'll figure it out. One day at a time, one dinner at a time, one awkward conversation at a time." "What if I mess it up?" "You will mess it up. We all will. But then we'll apologize and try again, and eventually it'll get easier." She touched his face, gentle. "That's what families do. They mess up and forgive and keep trying." Elias appeared in the doorway. "I'm heading to bed, shoulders bothering me." "I'll be up soon," Maeve said. Elias nodded to Colt. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know it wasn't easy." "Thank you for having me. I know that wasn't easy either." After Elias left, Colt and Maeve finished the dishes. Then she walked him to the door, and they stood in the threshold between her world and his. Will you come back? She asked. For dinner, I mean. Make it a regular thing? If you want me to. I do. We all do.
Even when it's complicated and strange and we don't know the rules.
What are the rules?
We're making them up, but here's the first one.
Show up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I can do that. Good. She kissed his cheek, quick and soft. Good night, Colt. Good night, Maeve. He walked back to the boarding house under a sky full of stars, his body aching but his heart feeling lighter than it had in 16 years. Tomorrow he'd start work at the livery.
Tomorrow he'd begin learning how to exist in one place without running. Tomorrow he'd take another step toward being the man his daughter deserved and the man Maeve had always believed he could be. But tonight, he'd shown up for dinner. He'd sat at a table with his family, his strange, complicated, imperfect family, and he hadn't run. It was a start. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and inevitable, like a river finding its course after a storm. Colt worked the livery from dawn until his body forced him to stop, learning the difference between breaking a horse and earning its trust, between violence and strength. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher, correcting without judgment, showing him that there were other ways to assert control than through a gun. The wounds healed slowly. Doc Mercer changed the bandages every few days, his commentary a mixture of grudging approval and medical skepticism that Colt had survived it all. The pain faded from sharp to dull, from constant to occasional, until it became just another scar in a collection that mapped his life in violence and narrow escapes. Dinners at Maeve's house became a fixture, awkward at first, but gradually finding their shape. Lila watched him with eyes that were learning to see him not as a stranger or a legend, but as something more complicated. A man who was trying, who failed sometimes, who showed up anyway. She asked him questions, testing the boundaries of what she could know, and he answered with more honesty than he'd given anyone in years. Elias remained a puzzle Colt couldn't quite solve. The man was gracious in ways that defied logic, making space at his table for the person who should have been his rival. But there was steel underneath the kindness, a quiet certainty that he had earned his place and wouldn't be displaced by blood or history. They circled each other carefully, two men sharing a family, neither quite sure how to be comfortable with the arrangement, but both determined to make it work. It was during the third week that Frank Holloway showed up at the livery. The new sheriff wore his badge like armor, his hand never far from his gun, his eyes carrying the kind of suspicion that came from knowing Colt's reputation and fearing it. He leaned against the fence while Colt worked a chestnut mare through her paces, waiting until Thomas had gone to the back before speaking. "Heard you're planning to stay," Holloway said. Colt didn't stop working. "Heard right? That might be a problem." "How so?" "You're wanted in 3 territories, got warrants for murder, attempted murder, and a list of other charges that'd take me an hour to read." Holloway's voice was flat, official. "I'm supposed to arrest you." Colt brought the mare to a stop, turned to face the sheriff fully. "So arrest me." "That's the thing. I asked around about what happened 16 years ago, asked about Samuel Harding and why you killed him." Holloway shifted his weight. "Talked to some folks who remembered. They said Harding was forcing himself on Maeve Brody, said you stopped him the only way he'd understand." "And?" "And I also know those witnesses lied at the inquest. Know Harding's cousin was the judge. Know the trial was fixed before it started." Holloway met his eyes. "But the warrants are still valid. Law doesn't care about context, just facts. And the fact is, you killed a man and ran. So what are you going to do?" Holloway was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to make you a deal. You stay clean, you stay out of trouble, you don't give me any reason to notice you're wanted. I'll forget I know. But the moment you step wrong, the moment you make me regret this decision, I'll have you in chains headed for territorial court so fast your head'll spin." "Why?" "Because this town owes you, because Elias Brody vouched for you, because I talked to Maeve and she convinced me you're trying to be different." Holloway straightened. "And because I'm not stupid enough to think I could take you in a fair fight. Rather have you as a law-abiding citizen than an enemy." Colt almost smiled. "Honest, at least. It's all I've got." Holloway tipped his hat. "Stay out of trouble, Varren." He left, and Colt stood in the corral thinking about second chances and whether he deserved this one. Thinking about the men he'd killed and the warrants that would follow him forever,
unless someone decided the past mattered less than the present. Thomas emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on a rag. Heard all that? You give me a choice or an order? Bit of both, but it's the best you're going to get. Thomas came to stand beside him. You planning to take it? Stay clean? Be boring? Live like a normal person? I'm planning to try. That's all anyone can ask. That evening, Colt showed up for dinner to find Lila waiting on the porch, her face troubled. Something wrong? He asked. There are boys at school. They've been saying things. What kind of things? That you're a killer, that you've murdered dozens of men, that I should be scared of you. She looked up at him, searching his face. Are they right? Should I be scared? Colt sat down on the porch step, gestured for her to join him. She did, keeping a careful distance that hurt more than his wounds ever had. I've killed 25 men, he said quietly. Most of them deserved it. Some of them were trying to kill me first. A few... He paused. A few were mistakes, times I was too fast or too angry or just too ready to see violence as the answer. Do you regret it? Every single one, even the ones who deserved it, even Samuel Harding, who was hurting your mother. Because killing changes you, makes you into someone you don't quite recognize. Lila was quiet, processing. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Because sometimes the only thing standing between good people and bad people is someone willing to do violence. And I was good at violence, so I did it. Are you still good at it? Yeah, probably always will be. It's not something you forget. Does that make you dangerous? Colt thought about the question, about the easy lie he could tell and the harder truth she deserved. Yes, he said finally. I'm dangerous. Will always be dangerous. But danger isn't the same as evil. A gun's dangerous. But it's just a tool. Depends on who's holding it and what they're aiming at. And what are you aiming at now? Being someone you're not ashamed to know. Being someone who shows up and does boring work and doesn't solve problems with bullets. He looked at her. Being a father, if you'll let me. I don't know if I can call you that. Papa is my father. Elias is your father, best one you could ask for. I'm just the other one. The one who shares your eyes and taught you to be stubborn without meaning to. Lila smiled slightly. Mama says I get that from both sides. She would know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Lila spoke again. The boys at school, they're scared of you. But I'm not. I think maybe I should be, but I'm not. Why not? Because I see how you are with the horses. How gentle you are with them, even though you're strong enough to force them. How patient you are even when they fight. She looked at him directly. You're trying to be good, and I think that counts for something. I hope so. The door opened and Maeve appeared. Dinner's ready. You two coming in or planning to philosophize on the porch all night? We're coming, Lila said, standing. She paused, then held out her hand to Colt. Come on, before the food gets cold. He took her hand, let her pull him up, and followed her inside where Elias was setting the table and pretending not to have been listening at the window. A month passed, then 2. Summer settled over Ash Hollow with heat that made the work at the livery brutal but honest. Colt's body finished healing, the scars turning from red to white, becoming just another part of the map he carried. He learned the names of the townspeople, learned which ones still feared him and which ones had decided he was safe. He paid his rent on time, attended dinners religiously, and slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, began to feel like he belonged. It was during the 8th week that the letter came. Thomas brought it to him one morning, the envelope dusty from travel, the seal bearing the mark of the territorial marshal's office. Colt's hands shook slightly as he opened it, preparing himself for the worst. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in precise legal script. Mr. Colt Varren. After review of the case regarding the death of Samuel Harding, and taking into consideration new testimony from witnesses who have come forward after 16 years of silence, the territorial court has decided to vacate the murder warrant issued against you. The case is hereby closed. You are free to live without fear of arrest or prosecution for this matter. Territorial Marshal James Thornton Colt read it 3 times, not quite believing the words. Good news? Thomas asked. The warrant's lifted. I'm free. Well, I'll be damned. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder.
What witnesses came forward? Colt didn't know, but he could guess. Could imagine Maeve finally telling the truth about what Samuel Harding had done. Could imagine others in town who'd been too scared or too bought to speak up 16 years ago finding the courage now. He showed the letter to Maeve that evening. She read it, tears sliding down her face. I testified, she admitted, wrote to the marshal's office a month ago, told them everything that happened that night, everything Samuel did to me, everything I should have said 16 years ago when it mattered. Why now? Because you stayed. Because you were trying so hard to be good despite that weight hanging over you. Because Lila deserves to have a father who's free, not one who's always looking over his shoulder. She handed the letter back. Because I love you. Still. Always.
Elias, who'd been listening from the kitchen, appeared in the doorway. What does this mean? For you? Means I can stay without Holloway's deal hanging over me. Means I'm not a wanted man anymore. Colt looked between them. Means I can actually build a life here if you'll still have me. We'll have you, Lila said, appearing from her room where she'd been doing homework. But you have to keep showing up for dinners. That's the rule. I can manage that. That night, after dinner, after Lila had gone to bed, the three adults sat on the porch and talked about what came next, about the strange family they'd built and how to make it sustainable, about boundaries and expectations and the 1,000 small compromises that would make this work. I need you to know, Elias said to Colt, that I don't hate you. I want to. Would be easier if I did. But I can't hate a man who's trying this hard to be better. I don't hate you either, Colt replied. Respect you, actually. Takes a stronger man than me to make space for someone who could take everything from him. You can't take what I've already given freely. Elias looked at Maeve. I married her knowing her heart was divided. Raised Lila knowing her blood came from somewhere else. Made peace with it years ago. But it still has to hurt. Everything worth doing hurts a little. That's how you know it matters. Maeve stood, moved to stand between them. I won't choose between you. Can't choose. Because I need you both for different reasons. Elias grounds me, keeps me steady, reminds me that love can be safe and enduring. Colt challenges me, reminds me who I was before I learned to be careful, shows me that passion doesn't have to be destructive. So what does that make us? Colt asked. Family, complicated, imperfect, nothing like what anyone planned, but family nonetheless. They sat in the growing darkness, three people who'd found their way to each other through violence and time and the kind of stubborn determination that refused to accept easy answers. The weeks became months. Summer faded into fall, and with it came the kind of clarity that only distance could provide. Colt saw how Lila looked at Elias, with the kind of casual affection that came from security, from knowing he would always be there. He saw how she looked at him, with curiosity and caution, and the beginning of something that might become trust. He learned to be patient, learned to let her come to him instead of forcing connection, learned that being a father meant showing up even when you didn't know what to say, meant being present even when you felt like an intruder. One afternoon in late September, Lila found him at the livery and asked if he'd teach her to shoot. Why? Colt asked, surprised. Because you know how. Because Papa never learned properly. Because I want to know I can defend myself if I need to. What does Elias think about this? He said to ask you. Said if I was going to learn, better to learn from someone who knows what they're doing. Colt thought about refusing. Thought about all the ways teaching her violence could go wrong. But then he thought about Wade Talbot and men like him, about the world that didn't care about innocence or good intentions. All right, but we do it properly. Safety first, respect for the weapon, understanding that it's a last resort and not a first option. Deal. They spent Sunday afternoons at the edge of town, Colt teaching her stance and breathing and the discipline that made shooting about control instead of power. She was a natural, her hands steady, her focus absolute. It terrified him how good she was, how easily she picked up the mechanics. You've got a talent for this, he said after she'd put 5 shots in the center of the target. Is that good or bad? Depends on what you do with it. Talent's just capacity. What matters is choice. Did you choose to be good at killing? No. But I chose to keep doing it after I found out I was good at it. That's where I went wrong. She lowered the gun, engaged the safety like he'd taught her. I won't make that mistake. Good. Because the world's got enough killers.
What it needs is people who know how to fight but choose not to unless they absolutely have to. Is that what you're doing now? Choosing not to? Every single day. Word of the shooting lessons spread, and predictably, not everyone was happy. Councilman Marsh showed up at the livery one morning, his face red with indignation. "You're teaching that girl to shoot? What kind of message does that send?" "The message that she can protect herself," Colt replied, not looking up from the saddle he was mending. "She's 15 years old." Frontier's full of 15-year-olds who know how to handle a gun. Better she learns right than learns wrong. Her mother gave permission. Her father, both of them, gave permission. So unless you're suddenly in charge of Lila Brody's upbringing, I'd suggest you mind your own business. Marsh sputtered, but left, and Colt went back to work, smiling slightly. That evening, Maeve cornered him before dinner. "Marsh came to see me, said you were corrupting Lila." "I'm teaching her to shoot." "That corruption?" "To some people, yeah." Maeve moved closer. "But not to me. I want her to know how to defend herself. Want her to have skills I never had when I needed them." "She's good at it, really good." "She's your daughter. Of course she's good at it." Maeve's voice softened. "But she's also Elias's daughter, which means she's got the judgment to know when to use that skill and when to walk away. Let's hope." Winter came early that year, bringing snow that transformed Ash Hollow into something clean and new. The work at the livery slowed, giving Colt time to help Elias repair the schoolhouse roof, to assist Maeve with preparations for the town's harvest celebration, to simply exist without the constant need to prove himself. He and Elias developed a cautious friendship, built on shared work and shared love for the same people. They didn't talk much about the arrangement, about the strange geometry of their family, but they fell into a rhythm, Elias handling the day-to-day, the steady presence, while Colt provided the occasional adventure, the reminder that the world was bigger than Ash Hollow. Lila seemed to accept it, seemed to understand that she could love them both differently, that having two fathers didn't diminish either one. It was Christmas Eve when everything finally settled into place. The Brody house was warm with candles and the smell of pine and cooking food. Colt had been invited for dinner, as had Thomas and Doc Mercer and a few other people who'd become something like family over the months. Lila surprised him with a gift, a photograph she'd commissioned from the traveling photographer who'd passed through town in November. It showed the four of them, Maeve and Elias and Lila and Colt, standing together in front of the house, looking awkward and uncertain, but undeniably connected. "So I remember," Lila said quietly. "So I have proof this isn't just a strange dream." Colt stared at the photograph, at this impossible family captured in silver and paper. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She hesitated, then added, "Papa?" The word hung in the air, fragile and precious. "You don't have to call me that," Colt said. "Elias is your papa." "He's papa." You're also papa. Just different." She looked at Elias, who nodded encouragement. "Mama says there's no rule about how many fathers a girl can have. Says love doesn't divide, it multiplies." "Your mother's a wise woman." "I know." Later, after everyone had left and Lila had gone to bed, the three adults sat by the fire and talked about the year that had passed, about how impossible it had seemed and how natural it had become. "I never thought we'd make this work," Elias admitted. "Thought for sure one of us would break, would demand a choice, would force everything to fall apart." "We still might," Maeve said. "This isn't a fairy tale. It's messy and complicated, and there'll be days we want to give up." "But we won't," Colt said, "because giving up would hurt Lila, and none of us wants that." "Is that the only reason you're staying?" Maeve asked. "For Lila?" Colt thought about it, thought about the life he'd built here, the friendships, the routine, the sense of belonging he'd never had before. "No, I'm staying because this is home. First real home I've ever had. I'm staying because I love you, both of you, in ways that don't make sense but feel right anyway." He looked at Elias. "I'm staying because you showed me there are different kinds of strength, that standing your ground isn't the same as fighting, that sometimes the bravest thing is making space for someone who could hurt you." "And I'm staying," Elias said, "because despite everything, this broken family we've built is better than any normal one I could have had, because Lila's happier knowing where she comes from, because Maeve's more complete having both parts of her heart in the same place." Maeve looked between them, tears shining in her eyes. "I don't deserve you, either of you." "Probably not," Colt agreed. "But you're stuck with us anyway?" They laughed, and it felt like release, like the final weightlifting. Spring came again, as it always did, bringing new life to the valley. Colt had been in Ash Hollow for nearly a year, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving the first time. The wanderlust he'd always felt, the need to keep moving, had faded to almost nothing. He still worked the livery, still had dinner with his family 3 times a week, still taught Lila to shoot on Sunday afternoons. But now there was something else, a sense of purpose beyond survival, a feeling that what he did mattered not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. Lila turned 16 in September, and they celebrated with a party that drew half the town. She was becoming a woman, strong and certain, and unafraid to speak her mind. She still called Elias Papa, still came to Colt when she needed a different perspective, still loved them both without feeling the need to choose. One evening in October, Colt found himself sitting on the porch with Elias, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "You ever think about leaving?" Elias asked. "Sometimes. Old habits die hard." "But you don't." "No, I don't." Colt leaned back in his chair. "Because leaving means losing this, and I've spent too much of my life losing things I care about. We're lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. You could have refused to share, could have made Maeve choose, could have made this impossible. And lose the woman I love? No thanks." Elias was quiet for a moment. "Besides, you make her happy in ways I can't. Make Lila understand herself better. That's worth sharing for." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd learned to be family despite every reason not to. Inside, Maeve and Lila were preparing dinner, their laughter drifting through the open window. The sound of it, casual joy, everyday contentment, was something Colt had never thought he'd have. "I killed 25 men," he said suddenly. "Spent 16 years running, did things I'm ashamed of, and hurt people I loved. But somehow I ended up here, in this impossible life with this impossible family. How does that make sense?" "It doesn't," Elias said. "Grace never does. You just accept it and try to be worthy of it." "Am I? Worthy of it?" "You show up, you try, you love them even when you don't know how. That's all any of us can do." The sun set completely, leaving them in twilight. Maeve called them in for dinner, and they went, these 2 fathers who'd learned to share, to forgive, to build something new from broken pieces. Years passed. Lila grew into a woman who carried herself with confidence and kindness in equal measure, who could shoot as well as any man in 3 territories, but chose diplomacy first. She married eventually, a good man who treated her well and wasn't intimidated by having 2 fathers to impress. Colt aged into someone unrecognizable, from the man who'd ridden into Ash Hollow, expecting to die. The violence that had defined him faded into history, replaced by the quiet dignity of honest work and showing up for the people he loved. Elias remained steady as stone, the foundation their family was built on, never competing with Colt but never diminishing either, just being present, being good, being enough. And Maeve held them all together, her love, the gravity that kept them orbiting each other, that turned what should have been impossible into simply what was. On Colt's 55th birthday, the whole family gathered, Lila and her husband and the grandchildren, Maeve and Elias still going strong, Thomas and Doc Mercer and half of Ash Hollow, who'd learned to see past the legend to the man. They celebrated in the house that had become home, and Colt looked around at the faces of people who knew him, really knew him, and chose to love him anyway. Lila raised a glass. "To Colt Varren, the man who taught me that family isn't about blood or law or any single story. It's about showing up, about trying, about loving even when it's complicated and hard and doesn't fit any normal pattern." And to Elias Brody, her husband added, "The man who taught us all that strength isn't about fighting, it's about making space for others to find their place." They drank, and Colt felt something he'd never expected to feel, complete. That night, after everyone had left, he sat on the porch with Maeve and Elias and watched the stars come out. "We did good," Maeve said softly. "Didn't we?" "Better than good," Elias agreed. "We built something real, something that lasted." Colt thought about the man he'd been, the killer, the coward, the legend built on violence and fear. Thought about Wade Talbot riding away defeated, about warrants lifted and second chances given. Thought about a girl with green eyes who'd learned to call two men father and mean it both times. Yeah, he said, we did good. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of autumn and wood smoke and all the homely scents that meant belonging. Somewhere in town, someone was playing a fiddle. Somewhere, people were living their lives in the peace that men like Colt had fought to protect. He'd come to Ash Hollow to die for love. Instead, he'd learned to live for it. Had learned that redemption wasn't a single moment of sacrifice but a lifetime of small choices, of showing up, of trying even when you failed. The feared gunman had become a father, a friend, a man who mattered not because of how many people he'd killed, but because of how well he loved the ones he'd chosen to stay for. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.